Few women of the 20th century lived a life as scandalous or as remarkable as Edwina Mountbatten. Born into immense wealth, she was once the richest heiress in the world, but splendor offered no shield against sorrow. As a child, she watched her mother die from tuberculosis, confined by grief, silenced by etiquette, and shadowed by a loneliness that would never quite leave her. She married into royalty, but could never be tamed. Her affairs scandalized the crown. Her name rippled through the salons of Mayfair, spoken in admiration and in warning. They called her cold, vain, restless. But when war came, Edwina Mountbatten rose. While others hosted charity balls, she rode the Burma Road, driving through war zones, sleeping on camp beds beside the sick, and rescuing abducted women and children in the jungles of Southeast Asia. She flew to the front lines of Europe and the Pacific, not as a symbol, but as a force. As the last vicereine of the British Empire, she walked unguarded through the fires of partition, holding the hand of Gandhi, brought comfort to the dying, and fought fiercely for women's rights, all while the world burned around her. But in the ashes of empire, she found something unexpected. A love story, quiet, fateful, with India's first prime minister. Their letters and meetings scandalized Britain. Newspapers shamed her. History books tried to silence her. But Edwina Mountbatten could never be silenced. This is a story of love and loss, war and heartbreak, of a woman who broke through the quiet walls built to contain her. From the gilded halls of Mayfair to the jungles of Burma, from the domed palaces of Delhi to the quiet ache of a restless heart. For the first time ever, this is the full story of Lady Edwina Mountbatten, a woman who shattered the silence, defied the crown, and built her legacy in the ashes of empire. If you enjoy stories like this, consider leaving a comment, giving the video a like, or joining the channel. With over 70 women's biographies and more released each week, this is a place for those who believe history is richer, deeper, and more powerful when we look beyond the scandals and into the full lives of extraordinary women. Now, let's begin the full uncensored biography of Lady Edwina Mountbatten, the woman who scandalized the crown and defied an empire. Whenever Edwina Mountbatten did something bold or bewildering, society would murmur with an arched brow that she was only half English. It was a phrase full of condescension. What they meant, of course, was her grandfather, Sir Ernest Cassel. Cassel was not born to power, he built it. Born in 1852 into a Jewish banking family, he rose like quicksilver through Europe's financial veins. By 22, he was rescuing governments and reshaping currencies. His fortune swelled across copper mines and railroads, arms deals, and imperial loans. A personal friend of the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, Cassel controlled kings and barons, but his German birth and religion made him an outsider. Cassel married for love, lost his wife to tuberculosis, and kept only two things from the union: a British passport and a daughter, Maud. Into her, he poured his grief, his ambition, and his legacy. Cassel managed her upbringing like a portfolio, precisely, obsessively. She grew up among marble clocks and ancestral portraits, in air scented with lavender and restraint. Later, when her husband accused her of dancing too often and dining too late, she merely raised a brow and replied that she was making up for lost time. Edwina would be the same. By the late 1890s, Maud had come of age. Her suitor was Wilfred Ashley, tall, dashing, faintly uncertain. A soldier more than a wit, with a lineage that traced to Queen Victoria's first prime minister, liberal barristers, landed squires, and even Pocahontas. He lacked a title, but the Ashley name bore weight. Cassel approved. On their wedding day, the Prince of Wales sat among the guests, and Cassel, in his silent way, marked the moment. He donated £200,000 to fund a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients in memory of the wife he had lost, and in hope for the family to come. Within a year, Maud was expecting, and on the 28th of November 1901, in a drawing room lit by cut-glass chandeliers at 32 Bruton Street, Edwina Cynthia Annette Ashley was born. She entered the world wrapped in wealth, watched by nurses, and kissed by kings. Named after her godfather Edward VII. From the beginning, Edwina was adored, but always at arm's length. Maud moved through society like a wisp of silk, appearing in intervals to kiss her daughter's brow, preserve a lock of hair in tissue, or pose for portraits. but the nursery belonged to nurses. Even in infancy, Edwina learned that affection was beautiful and fleeting. Her early childhood unfolded across a gilded kaleidoscope of drawing rooms and estates. She passed from governess to governess, cousin to cousin, house to house, never rooted, always observing. Life was orderly, but impersonal. She belonged to a class, not to a home. Her parents moved in different orbits. Wilfred, earnest and anxious, followed politics and punctuality. Maud, bright, brittle, forever breathless, chased light, air, distraction. Neither paused long enough to anchor Edwina. She became a girl of the margins, present, polite, and quietly vanishing. But there was one constant: her grandfather. Cassel poured his heart into Edwina. He wrote to her, brought kittens, rabbits, a pony. He asked about her cat's cough, stood beside her as she learned to ride, watched for the flush of color in her cheeks, just as he once had in Maud's. With him, Edwina was not a figure to be presented, but a person to be known. When Maud gave birth to a second daughter, Ruth, who would be called Mary, Edwina was 5. She welcomed the new baby like she had her dolls and animals, with fierce, unspoken loyalty. For a time, Maud lingered at home to recover, and for that brief, golden season, Edwina had a mother. She remembered it as a kind of miracle. But the spell, like all spells, dissolved. Soon she was dressing for dinners she would not attend, curtsying to guests she would never see again, smiling through the fog of adult conversation. She learned to observe, to mirror, to glide along the surface. No one taught her how to be loved, only how to behave. By 1907, Maud's vitality began to fail. The brightness in her cheek was the deceptive flush of tuberculosis. Cassel recognized it too well. He had seen it before, when it claimed the woman he loved. He took Maud to Egypt, hoping the dry air would heal what London could not. For a moment, Maud revived, then faltered again, just as Cassel was hosting the king. Restless and displaced, she begged for Edwina. The child was fetched, photographed beside her grandfather and the sovereign, offered candied violets, and allowed to stroke the royal spaniel. Then she was sent away once more. This would become the rhythm of her childhood. Brief, dazzling bursts of attention followed by long, silent absences. In Edwardian society, children were not companions. They were ornaments, well-dressed, well-trained, and best kept out of sight. Edwina and Mary were no exception. There were moments, small and luminous, of familial warmth. A birthday tea beside Maud's sickbed, a morning stroll with Wilfred down Bond Street. But they were exceptions, not norms. Edwina listened closely. She watched, and she began to draw the most dangerous of childhood conclusions, that love had to be earned. At 8, she opened a savings account. When Wilfred made an offhand joke about being broke, she offered him everything she had. She had begun to translate affection into usefulness. In 1908 and 1909, Edwina spent no more than a handful of weeks under the same roof as her mother. From villa to hotel, sanatorium to seaside, Maud drifted, chasing sun, doctors, and fleeting hope. In one letter to Father Christmas, Edwina asked only for maps, so she might trace the places her mother wandered. Maud's postcards were sweet but strange. A sketch of a sleeping compartment with a note that read, "You can't see me, I'm asleep inside." A letter from Aswan with drawings of pigs and donkeys. Edwina kept them all. Maud never quite knew how to reach her daughter. She offered affection without intimacy, warmth with no depth. And Edwina, always polite, received it like a gift she didn't quite know how to unwrap. Eventually, the doctors confirmed Cassel's deepest fear. Tuberculosis of the glands. Egypt hadn't worked. Neither had Paris. Switzerland offered little more than delay. For Edwina's birthday, she sent a silver brush and a velvet jewel box. Edwina replied with careful gratitude, "I loved the one you got me ready last year." There was no party, only a rain-drenched cake and a growing silence. Each morning, Edwina whispered her mantras, "When Mama is strong again, when Mama is home again." That December, she pinned her hopes on a single date, Maud's birthday. She and Mary, in careful script, sent out invitations. Edwina and Mary Ashley request the pleasure of your company to tea in the headroom at 5 o'clock. RSVP. Maud, of course, did not come. At Christmas, the absences doubled. Wilfred traveled to Egypt. Sir Ernest, left with the girls, did his best. They saw Aladdin. Edwina made toffee at Stanmore and sent it to Maud with a note, "It is very good. When I see you again, we shall make some every week." But beneath the cheer, the letters ached. Everything has been so good, Mama. If only you were here. We would like a little baby boy. There would be no baby. Edwina never cried. She smiled, hoped, and asked only for what others might be willing to give. She was steady, composed, unfailingly kind. So good, in fact, that an aunt once mocked her for it. Too good to be true. But it wasn't an act. It was her armor. In the spring, Maud lay pale and wan on a daybed in the gardens of the Grove. Edwina was permitted to read aloud in the afternoons before being sent away to Blackpool for the summer. For her 9th birthday, Maud sent money and a set of clothes brushes, but she never asked to see her daughter. Edwina began to wonder if she had done something wrong. "I only wanted to be with you a little while," she wrote. "I'm sorry if I was naughty." Then came the final winter. Wilfred was away for another election. Maud was moved back to Bruton Street. Nurses were installed, and Edwina, ever hopeful, wrote, "In my dream last night, I saw you quite dressed." But the dream never came true. On the 5th of February 1911, Maud died. She was 35. The funeral was held at Romsey Abbey. The children were not allowed to attend. Edwina wrote to her father, "I am so very sorry, darling Mama left us all so suddenly and forever. I wanted to kiss her only once, and now I didn't." It was a grown-up letter. Too grown-up. The kind written by a child who already believed that sorrow must be silenced and that tears were impolite. She had convinced herself that if she behaved perfectly, if she was quiet, kind, obedient, Maud might recover, might praise her, might stay. She had no words for death, only the ache of its aftermath. After Maud's death, Wilfred buried himself in Westminster, wandering its corridors like a ghost. He spoke little, smiled never. On weekends, he vanished into the whirl of country house parties, seeking noise to drown out the silence. The girls were given no words for grief. Only routine. Only instruction. Mary, just 6, grieved loudly. Edwina would quiet her, brush her hair, straighten her collar. Her own grief ran deeper and quieter. She blamed herself, as children do, sincerely, illogically. If only she had read more, written more, said the right thing. If only she had been enough. Instead, she became dutiful. She offered solace to others and asked for nothing herself. She was thoughtful to the point of exhaustion, ceremonial to the point of invisibility. She was trying to be everything: Wilfred's comfort, Mary's protector, Cassel's hope. But sadness loomed. However, just in time, someone arrived. Her name was Laura de Veria. Miss de Veria became Edwina's governess in September 1912. She was firm but never cold, intelligent but never stiff. She moved with quiet confidence, a gentle breeze in the cloistered halls. Within weeks, the atmosphere shifted. Edwina adored her. Lessons expanded. Edwina read Kipling, then Tennyson, then Shelley. She was taken to concerts, shown paintings, introduced to ideas. Slowly, life took shape again. That summer, they went to Switzerland. The children walked the hills, drank milk in wildflower meadows, and took tea on mountaintops. It was a season of sun and ease, a season of healing. It was also the last, because by August, Britain was at war and Wilfred had remarried. Her name was Molly. Edwina and Mary had never met her. They scarcely knew of her existence. And yet, on the 28th of August, 1914, just weeks after Britain declared war, she became their stepmother. Molly stepped into Maud's place with astonishing ease and no tact. She tore down curtains, rearranged furniture, and had Broadlands redecorated before her wedding ring had even settled. She was brisk, sure of herself, and intolerant of contradiction. Within days, the girls were banished from the drawing room and sent to bed at 6:30 sharp. "To be out of the way," Molly said. She insisted the children call her Madre. They did, but in tones reserved for fairy tale stepmothers and comic operettas. Edwina complied, as she always did, but something in her had begun to shift. Worse still, Molly despised Laura de Veria, the governess who had restored color to Edwina's life. She found her too warm, too easy, too adored. Within weeks, Laura was dismissed. And so the pattern returned: control without kindness, structure without soul. Mary, it was decided, was to be sent away to school. Too noisy, too emotional, too defiant. Edwina knew what the decision meant, and she resisted in the only way she could: quietly, fiercely, with love. She planted forget-me-nots in Mary's patch of garden, rash and wild in January soil. She made peppermint creams, wrapped them in wax paper, and sent them by post. Letters passed between them like lifelines. The house was silent. Each day brought its drills. Lessons, long walks, Latin, knitting socks for soldiers. Edwina devoured books. A Study in Scarlet, Dombey and Son. Her nose pressed so close to the page that finally a governess noticed. She was diagnosed with myopia. Glasses were prescribed. She hated them. She slipped them off the moment she could and read until her head throbbed. She would rather endure pain than be seen as weak. By 13, Edwina was quietly exacting. She cataloged books, logged piano scores, and kept her diary with archival precision. Every penny was accounted for. 2 pence for church, 6 for sweets, a shilling for wool. Guests were tallied, telegrams priced, her glove size recorded, her boot size too. Never her weight. Wilfred, unaware of the wound, once called her Fatsy. She never forgot it. That spring, the 4th toe on her right foot bruised too easily. She was sent to a London nursing home. It was to be partially amputated. The operation was ghastly. The nurses were brisk, not kind. No one offered care. Relief came in the form of Mary's return. The sisters roamed Harrods and Debenhams. There were beach races, games, and long walks with Sir Ernest. The world, briefly, became warm again. But as always, the parting came. Mary returned to school. Edwina to Broadlands. War, once distant, crept closer, and Edwina began to follow it like a scholar. She clipped newspaper articles and pasted them into her diary under the heading History of the War. She asked to visit wounded soldiers, and when allowed, she did not flinch. She listened, she learned, and then in July came the final insult. Molly had decided. Edwina must be sent away to school. The decision came down like a sentence. There had been omens, the death of her mice, then Goldie the pheasant, then poor Crumps the tortoise, each buried in the garden beneath solemn trees. Wilfred broke the news just before dinner on July 3rd. Edwina recorded the date in her diary with the solemnity of a memorial. A black-letter day. Madre wanted to get rid of me, she wrote, the pig. And for the first time, she did not obey. What followed was a full-scale rebellion, waged across the lawns and corridors of Broadlands. The cook heard it. The grooms heard it. Even Jackie, the pet jaybird, heard it. Edwina stormed through the garden, railed to her governess, and rejoiced when Wilfred and Molly departed for London. The Lord be praised, she scribbled, for the departure of the latter. But the storm, like all tempests, passed. Term would not begin until September. There was time still to say farewell to the trees she had climbed, the paths she had wandered, the animals she had tended, and to the childhood she had known. And so, in late September, she boarded the train to Eastbourne. The school was called the Lynx. The days were orderly and long. Evenings brought solemn newspaper readings, followed by a slow and ceremonial procession to bed, accompanied by piano music. Edwina described it with one word, ghastly. And yet, the place was not without its charms. The school itself sprawled across several villas, patched together like an eccentric dollhouse. The walls were pale, the vases always filled, the brass radiators warm even in the gray sea mists. She shared a bedroom with Mary. In French and German, she rose to the top. Her essays, though not always appreciated, showed flair. There were walks on the downs, occasional roller skating in the corridors, and if the mistresses were in generous moods, an outing to the sea. But none of it was quite enough. I liked the noise in the town better, she admitted in a rare moment of candor. What she missed, more than anything, was movement, freedom, laughter, life unscripted by bell or timetable. The months passed in a blur of card games, lectures, amateur concerts, and carefully monitored holidays. On her 15th birthday, she received a diamond foxhead brooch with ruby eyes. Madre, predictably, forgot the date, but Sir Ernest never did. The holidays glimmered with crackers and candles, boxes wrapped in tissue from Paris and Rome. There were emeralds, jade, books bound in leather. But the curriculum was thin, no Latin, no Greek, arithmetic barely touched. It felt provincial, insufficient. And by her 2nd year, she wanted to leave. Her father agreed, and Edwina would enter a finishing school, or rather, as many young aristocratic women did, a domestic science training college. The girls, perched precariously between adolescence and adulthood, were expected to scrub floors, launder linens, and prepare stews in smoky kitchens. Edwina captioned one photograph from this time, "Learning to be a woman the hard way." These courses were not given to teach the girls to clean. They were given so they could learn how to manage staff. She wrote to Sir Ernest almost daily, pleading for a trip abroad, France or Italy, anywhere, with a suitable chaperone, of course. Her excitement practically glowed through the page. Sir Ernest agreed and made the arrangements. The departure was set for October. The journey began in Paris, where Edwina and her cousin Marjorie took rooms at the Ritz. Their suite had twin bathrooms, silk drapes, and breakfast trays delivered by men in starched white jackets. Still shy, Edwina hid beneath the covers when they entered. That shyness, she later admitted, did not last. Sir Ernest had laid out the pillars of the tour: shopping, culture, and refinement. And so the itinerary began. The Louvre, Notre Dame, the opera. Dutifully, Edwina called it perfectly wonderful. On her birthday, Edwina received a fur coat made of mole lined in silk. There were gloves, blouses, feathered hats, and modest jewels. She was learning, quite deliberately, how a woman of the world shops. By the time they crossed into Italy, she looked transformed, less schoolgirl, more swan. In Rome, the days fell into a rhythm of elegance and education. There was an Italian teacher, an etiquette guide, a dozen dusty palazzos to explore. They visited the Forum, the Sistine Chapel, and the Vatican Gardens. They studied sculpture by morning, piano by afternoon, and dined with royals. "So nice," she wrote. But the letters home told only half the story. She didn't mention Captain Mott, or Mr. Scott with his lacquered hair, and certainly not Ricardo, the Duke with the velvet cloak and the dangerous smile. Nor did she report the cigarettes smoked in Roman cafes, or the wine sipped over long lunches, or the glittering evenings when balconies turned into dance floors and salons into stages. They posed for photographs, lounged on velvet cushions, and flung open the terrace doors to the Roman night. They danced, they drank, they laughed like they'd never known anything else. Back in England, Sir Ernest read Edwina's letters, filled with references to sculpture, frescoes, and music theory. But they never saw the photographs of the brooding Italian men she took, or of her cousins smoking a cigarette in profile. It was not a debut, not quite, but it was something far more dangerous. Edwina had learned to speak with authority in boutiques, to command waiters and clerks, to flirt without invitation and disappear without explanation. She had learned how attention felt and how to control it. She had acquired more than a vocabulary. She had tasted the power of being wanted and understood how to keep it just out of reach. Sir Ernest had intended the trip as an education. He got one, just not the kind he expected. In Rome, Edwina discovered something far more potent than charm. She discovered freedom. The power of doing as she pleased while the world only guessed. She hadn't stepped into society. She had stepped into herself, gracefully, irreversibly. When Edwina returned home, she was met not with warmth, but with indifference. Molly remained cool, Wilfred distracted. It was Sir Ernest who declared she would stay at Brooke House, and that, come May, she would be launched into society from there. Brooke House was neither silent nor still. It throbbed with staff and ceremony. The chef presided over 4 assistants. The housekeeper managed a small army of maids, one assigned full-time simply to dust the vases. Her presentation at court was scheduled for May. Only a dozen girls would emerge as that year's chosen darlings, judged by lineage, fortune, and beauty. Intelligence was not required. Out went the school skirts and blouses. In came pleated gowns and jackets with a subtle flair. Hats were chosen to cast flattering shadows. Dressmakers came with pins and tape. Sir Ernest paid every bill. His granddaughter was his final, most fascinating investment. She was launched with a ball at Brooke House, her debut gracing every paper, their columns breathless with praise. For 8 weeks, she was seen at dinners, dances, and suppers. But the truth was quieter. She had never been trained in conversation, had no mother to guide her, and often found herself marooned. And yet, she adapted. She danced with grace, listened with intent, and spoke with growing charm. In time, she was recognized as one of the most intriguing debutantes of the season. The papers called her the richest heiress. Still, the season had limits. Conversations with young men were permitted only within the bounds of a waltz or a dinner seating. with keen-eyed dowagers and chaperones watching everything. At 18, Edwina was restless. She asked to be moved at table, pleaded to skip certain events, and begged to be spared political conversation. When that failed, she mastered the art of evasion. Small cafes became sanctuaries. She left notes implying she was with her cousin Marjorie, ostensibly acting as her chaperone, when in reality she was off having a stolen conversation with a suitor. Then came Cows, the second season. The days unfolded like ritual. Parties at Nubia House, dances at Lady Baring's. The same names circled from yacht to shore and back again. Portals, Manwarings, Vanderbilts. But this time there was a new guest, Louis Dickie Mountbatten. He had missed Cows the year before, away with the Prince of Wales on a royal tour through Australia and New Zealand. Now back, he spoke of little else. The prince, he said, had been bored, homesick, hopelessly in love with Frida Dudley Ward. Dickie, by contrast, had thrived. He had served as confidant, companion, aide-de-camp. And now he was newly single after his engagement to the beautiful Audrey James was broken off. Dickie was Queen Victoria's great-grandson, cousin to nearly every royal house in Europe. His mother's sister had married the Tsar. The Mountbattens descended from the House of Hesse, a principality known for its idealism, its arts, and its habit of marrying into empires. His father, Prince Louis of Battenberg, had risen through the Royal Navy to become First Sea Lord, until anti-German sentiment forced him out. In 1917, King George V anglicized the name. Battenberg became Mountbatten, and Dickie emerged as the heir of a freshly rewritten identity. He had met Edwina once before, at a Vanderbilt ball. She had given him a dance. He remembered her, barely. Now, he could not look away. Dickie was nothing like the men Edwina usually met. Her world was filled with tweeds and restraint, dry wit and languor. He moved fast. He aquaplaned behind launches in a rubber cap, somersaulted off the stern of yachts, and climbed rigging like a boy in a storybook. When Edwina asked his sister-in-law how old he was, Dickie noticed. "Your first sign of interest in me," he said. He was 21. She was not yet 20. They began to orbit each other at charity balls, yacht parties, dances. Mrs. Vanderbilt urged him to join their cruise along the French coast. He hesitated until Edwina asked directly, would he come? He would. On the final night, claiming a flicker of nausea, Edwina rang for a steward. Dickie arrived instead. The cure, he said, was to sleep on deck. And so they did, curled in a lifeboat beneath the stars, a tangle of youth and salt air. The next morning, he invited her to lunch with his parents. She said yes. Prince Louis met the car at the gate. He watched her step from it, poised, luminous, unreadable. "She's the best of her generation," he said. "If you marry her, you have my blessing." Soon after, Dickie's father died. The call came during a house party at Dunrobin Castle. He had collapsed at his club. Dickie spent the day with the Prince of Wales and found a note from Edwina, delivered sometime in the night. "Besides David," he wrote to her, "you were the only person I wanted to see. I wonder if you realize how enormously Papa took to you." That same week, Edwina received a summons of her own. Sir Ernest had collapsed across his desk at Brooke House. When she arrived, the great doors were closed. The lights dimmed. She stayed the night alone in his study, the air still bearing his scent. She had always been told that proper ladies didn't cry. But this pain, sharp, unfiltered, and without ceremony, left her hollow. Edwina was now left entirely unmoored. Whatever love and comfort she received as a girl had come from Sir Ernest, and with him gone, she felt lost. At first light, she sent a note to Dickie. He came at once, and together they walked to Hyde Park, walking beneath falling leaves, speaking of fathers, of grief, and impossibly, of the future. They had barely been together 3 weeks, but grief had stripped away performance, and what remained between them felt suddenly real. "Where should I go? What should I do?" Edwina asked. Dickie, for all his poise, had no answer. What he longed to say, he couldn't quite form. "It's so difficult to talk," he wrote afterward. "Sentimentalities mean nothing when spoken, and if felt, need not be spoken at all." His departure for India was imminent. Renown would sail on October 26th, carrying the Prince of Wales through India and Japan. The separation would last 246 days. He wanted to ask her to be his bride, but felt it would be wrong to do so before such a long separation. That morning, before boarding, Dickie handed her a small watch. "To keep track of the time," he said. But of course, it was more than that. As renown pulled away, he turned his telescope, not toward India, but back to shore where Edwina waited. Back in London, Edwina filled the silence as best she could. She danced at the Auralics until 3 a.m, attended plays, and lunched with suitors who failed to impress. Her letters to Dickie sparkled, deliberately. She dropped names: Paul Hammond, Henry Howard, Lord Fermoy. She wanted him to feel the ache of distance. He did. From Bombay, he sent lacquer bowls, 2 swords, and a map of the royal party, each face labeled by hand, their personalities scribbled in the margins like a secret. "If you memorize the uniforms," he wrote, "you'll know who's who when you arrive." She read the line twice, then folded the map carefully, as though sealing a promise. By December, she confessed that she was miserable and desperately wanted to go to India. She spoke to Wilfred, who, distracted as ever, saw no objection. It was agreed. A chaperone was arranged. She was coming out. He fussed over every detail: what to drink, what not to eat. He sent her a phrase book with essential translations. Summon the bearer, a whiskey and soda, send for the horse. Please and thank you were not included. India was unlike anything she had seen. Etiquette there had the gravity of ritual. Every gesture was choreographed. The viceroy and vicereine moved with deliberate grace. Servants, ranked by caste, trained in single acts, poured water and ironed linen like artists. Flowers were chosen to match each dress, scented basins, soft brooms brushing stone verandas. "I can't tell you how smart and rich one feels here," Edwina wrote. "A car whenever you want. 10 servants for everything. Special flowers for each dress." India was theater, and she had a starring role. They walked together, rode together, danced in the prince's drawing room. She taught Dickie a new step, and in a private moment he proposed. Caught in it all, Edwina said yes. The next morning they told the prince, the Reddings, and Lord Cromer. It was impossible not to tell them. "And they've all been too nice about it," Edwina wrote. Not everyone was thrilled. The viceroy, acting as her custodian, panicked. "Edwina brings far more than she gets," he warned. "Her fortune must remain protected," Sir Ernest would have insisted. Lady Redding, more blunt, wrote to Wilfred the next day. "I know nothing against him, except that he is too young. In a year she will be sick of him." She looked so pale and motherless. But there was no stopping it now. Edwina had chosen. By the time Dickie's formal letter arrived, requesting Wilfred's consent, the news had already swept through the palace. From the king to the queen, to the princes and their valets, to the endless corridors of court whisperers. By morning, it was all over London. Wilfred, predictably, was furious. He had been bypassed. He sulked, muttered his outrage in low tones, and refused to authorize any public announcement until Edwina returned in person. She, meanwhile, refused to let royal protocol shadow her final days in Delhi. She rode elephants at dawn, hunted through dusk, and went pig-sticking alone before breakfast, against etiquette, against advice, and returned with dust in her hair and triumph in her eyes. Dickie, when told, was horrified, but not surprised. Back in London, her arrival was met with telegrams, armfuls of roses, and the relentless flicker of press bulbs. Brooke House disappeared beneath an avalanche of gifts: pendants from Queen Alexandra, tiaras from Wilfred and Mrs. Cassel, a coronet of 5 diamond stars from Aunt Victoria. Edwina gave Dickie a Rolls-Royce, crowned with a silver sailor mascot. Their wedding was not simply a union. It was a spectacle. Fittings, trousseau, guest lists, days vanished into preparation. Lingerie in rose, mauve, and ochre arrived from Savigny and David, each piece folded over perfumed pads, embroidered with entwined initials. The press was enchanted. The marble staircase became a grove of orange trees. Lilies spilled through every room. Her gown shimmered in silver cloth and antique lace. Her bouquet held a single Madonna lily. Dickie, waiting at the altar, imagined himself afloat, adrift in a sea of silk and spectacle. At 3 p.m., he wrote in his diary, "We were married." They walked beneath an arch of naval swords. Edwina, powdered but unpainted, bit her lips for color. They drove to Broadlands, but the rolls broke down. A fuse kept blowing. Every few miles, Dickie pulled over to patch it while Edwina smoked beneath the trees. At Romsey, they arrived as the village fete was ending. A modest dinner waited. Upstairs, the fire flickered. They undressed cautiously, nervous, ceremonial. Nurse Harrison had given Edwina a final lesson in biology. They went to bed, then slept, and woke, obligated to try again. perfect, wonderful bliss, he wrote. And later, with detachment, we went to the cinema the next day to watch the newsreel of our own wedding. Seeing themselves, frozen, luminous, and unreal, made it feel true. By the 5th day, they were back in London, dining with the Prince of Wales. Then Paris, a city Edwina had imagined as scandal and smoke. Dickie delivered museums and monuments. She searched for passion. He silently exhaled. Then they drove south. Dickie had charted every leg. Edwina wanted to drift. He canceled the itinerary. In Tours, their room overlooked a boiler. In Bergerac, the plumbing gave way. In Santander, royal cousins swept them into dinner. Queen Anna took Dickie. The king took Edwina. She woke sick the next morning. A doctor was summoned, not pregnant. In Germany, they reached Wolfsgarten. Ivy curled around the shutters. The long grass whispered. Uncle Ernie and Aunt Honor welcomed them gently. Don and Lou filmed them lounging, Dickie in a towel, Edwina in a dressing gown. For one breath of time, it felt like a beginning. Then came America, louder, faster, waiting. From the moment they disembarked in New York, the Mountbattens were stars. The press couldn't get enough. A royal wedding, a naval groom, a glamorous, wealthy bride. They were young, dazzling, and distant enough to seem like fiction. Reporters swarmed the dock. Photographers chased their car. They were swept into the Fairbanks Pickford Circle. Charlie Chaplin met them at Pasadena Station, driving the Fairbanks Rolls-Royce. When Douglas and Mary left for New York, they casually lent Pickfair to the newlyweds, a white wood fantasy perched on the hills where giraffes wandered the grounds and everything glittered. Chaplin proposed they make a film, nice and friendly, shot on location at Pickfair. Edwina was the damsel, Dickie the hero. Chaplin directed and performed. The plot: Edwina is kidnapped for her necklace. No one remembered their lines. Edwina was stiff but delighted. Dickie was elated. They raced from studio lots to supper clubs, chasing parties up and down the coast. They rode horses, picnicked with producers, met Babe Ruth, posed for newsreels. Everywhere they went, they were photographed, applauded, admired. For Dickie, it was the perfect stage. For Edwina, it was something better: freedom. She danced until morning, laughed too loudly, kissed strangers on the cheek. She didn't have to be polite, only dazzling, and she was. They traveled east in a private train car chartered just for them. Dickie admired the precision. Edwina leaned into the motion. Cocktails at noon, oilskins at Niagara Falls, press conferences in white gloves. At Santa Fe, Native Americans posed solemnly beside them as the flashbulbs burst. In Washington, he gave a Navy League speech. In Florida, they picnicked among palm groves. In New York, Mrs. Vanderbilt hosted a farewell dinner. Edwina received 3 birthday cakes in a single day, from the Warburgs, the Dillinghams, and the Fifth Avenue debutantes. Just before dawn, Paul Whiteman arrived with his band and played them out of America. On the Olympic, they finally slowed. Dickie slept. Edwina smoked. She looked out over the gray Atlantic and didn't know whether what she felt was joy or simply momentum. Back from America, Edwina struggled to adjust. Poker, tennis, pantomimes, it all felt slow. In London, she tried to keep the pace: a new club, a new show, a new dinner every night. She and Dickie hit every major night spot in Mayfair. Then came the news. Dickie had been ordered to Constantinople to serve aboard Revenge. Edwina was furious. Left behind, she'd be miserable. He consoled her with a toy rabbit and a kiss. That night, she wrote in her diary, "Very miserable." It was their first night apart since the wedding. Edwina drifted. Fog settled thick over Park Lane. Brooke House felt cold and empty. While most of society was marooned in damp country houses, Edwina clung to a handful of loyal friends. Together, they returned to the old rhythm: dancing at the Berkeley and the Grafton Galleries, jazz at the Midnight Follies. But the days were harder. There were no duties, only shopping, bridge, quiet luncheons, a trip to the dentist, and letters. Always letters to Dickie. By February, she was exhausted. "Nothing," she wrote, "can revive me for long." Dickie was contrite. He promised to make it up to her. After 3 months apart, Dickie returned to London, ready for a child. Their days were filled with luncheons at Claridge's and Brooke House. Their nights, dancing at the Savoy, jazz at the Folies Bergère, parties in Tallulah Bankhead's dressing room. George Gershwin played. Quite like a second honeymoon, Dickie mused. In June, Edwina became pregnant. Both were elated. But in July, Revenge sailed north. In August, she joined Dickie in Edinburgh, where he'd secured a suite at the Caledonian Hotel. There she took long walks, sat for fittings, and begged friends to visit. She was learning what it meant to be a naval wife. But she didn't like the weather, the stillness, or the waiting. Back in London, Edwina returned to the Riviera Club, the Grafton Galleries, the Blue Lagoon, often with Hugh Molyneux. Dickie, back in mid-August, found her as energetic as ever. They raced from club to club, sometimes dancing to Fred Astaire and his sister Adele. She preferred places that weren't smart. Rector's, for instance, down a basement off Tottenham Court Road. Smoke, music, no one watching. She gave up tennis. She knitted, she waited. It didn't suit her. After 3 days, she collapsed, migraine, neuralgia. In January, Dickie sailed for the Mediterranean. Edwina moved into Brooke House. At 10 p.m. on the 13th of February, Nurse Nisbet called Dr. Simpson. Edwina thought it a false alarm, but within hours, under chloroform, she gave birth. A divine little daughter, she wrote in her diary, carefully, in pencil, so she wouldn't stain the sheets. Too thrilling. The fuss began at once. Cables, flowers, telegrams, gifts. An arrow of rubies from Mrs. Cassel. A bracelet once worn by Queen Victoria from Dickie's mother. A ruby ring from Dickie. He'd received the news by cable at 10 a.m. Aboard Revenge, the officers toasted with champagne. A daughter, he wrote, so much nicer than I ever imagined. I feel quite drunk about it. The cause of all the excitement, Patricia Edwina Victoria, was promptly installed in the nursery. The Prince of Wales came to admire her. So did Prince George. Edwina was more detached. She described Patricia as having lots of hair and the divinest little head imaginable, but there was little else to say. The nanny took over. Edwina focused on recovering, electric massage, quiet lunches. By March, the baby was sent to Branksome Den. With her figure restored, Edwina resumed her life. First, Paris for fittings. Then to Mrs. Pulitzer's villa in Antibes. Parties stretched till dawn. Edwina went dancing, gambling, and most thrilling of all, motoring. In April, Dickie came home on leave and met his daughter for the first time and fell in love. The christening took place on the 22nd of April at the Chapel Royal. Edwina wore black satin trimmed in ermine. Patricia squirmed under the lace. Edwina's albums for 1924 were filled with yachting trips, polo cups, and Simon the Black Spaniel. Only 9 photos of Patricia appear in those early months. Like her own mother, Edwina left childcare to experts. The Mountbattens were everywhere. Edwina applauded Dickie's polo, played golf with him, tried ponies, motor cars, and dance steps. They went to the theater, the cinema, and every new revue. They attended royal courts and state balls. To outsiders, it looked like bliss. After Dickie's next departure, Edwina ran faster than ever. She moved from Wimbledon to Ascot to Cowes to Paris. She visited Mary at finishing school, dropped in on the Olympic Games, a launch dinner on the Vanderbilt's yacht, Polo, and a 3-day house party at Broadlands where George Gershwin played and the Astaires danced. To observers, it was one long costume ball, and Edwina dressed the part. Gray fox fur and rose-pink hats for the races, orange silk for cows, a red hat and white fox for polo. By night, chiffon gowns and fur-trimmed capes. Fashion was a commitment. Paris in spring, again in autumn. In London, she squeezed fittings between massages, manicures, and hair appointments. When heavy earrings became the rage, she had her lobes pierced and hardened so she could carry jeweled fruit-shaped pendants. She stayed slim through strict dieting and constant motion. Tennis by day, 3 hours of dancing each night. Even in stillness, she shimmered, though she was rarely still. With Dickie back, they returned to America, this time with the Prince of Wales. Edwina danced until dawn. Dickie took his morning massage and pretended to enjoy himself. He didn't. He was beginning to feel unwell. They were meant to stay on Long Island with oil millionaire Joshua Cosden. But as soon as they arrived, Dickie was diagnosed with tonsillitis and sent to bed. Edwina didn't slow down. She lunched under umbrellas, aquaplaned behind motorboats, and returned at dawn from Manhattan clubs in thin silk dresses, cooled only by the sea breeze. Her newest admirer, Johnny Gaston, was always on the phone. Dickie could hear them from his sickbed. One night, he escaped to Coney Island with 2 naval friends. He got home at 2 a.m. Edwina wasn't back yet. She returned at 6. He had waited up, hoping to share his evening. She was furious. She thought he was spying on her. For 2 days, Edwina did only what Dickie liked: aquaplaning, the Ziegfeld Follies, Will Rogers at supper, and long evenings with his projector. But something lingered. Then, with only days left before their return to England, Edwina rewarded herself for being good with a flirtatious lunch with Lytle Hull. When Dickie reminded her that the signal course was about to begin, she said, coolly, that she intended to stay in New York. She called him boring, said he hated her friends, looked down on her tastes. Dickie, baffled, could only apologize, agreeing he was a bore, a snob, a hopeless dancer, a bad navigator. Much of it was true, but Edwina despised him for admitting it. As a lover, Dickie was enthusiastic but unskilled. He had married without practice, and 3 chaotic weeks in America had only widened the gap. Edwina couldn't quite say what was wrong, and Dickie had no idea how to fix it. He sailed home alone on the Homeric, determined to become the man she wanted. Edwina, alone, resumed the triangle. Johnny Gaston and Lytle Hull hovered, sometimes together, more often apart. She believed she was keeping them all at arm's length, that juggling admirers proved she was unavailable. But each man thought he was the one. When rebuffed, they turned on her. After weeks of tension, Edwina realized she had miscalculated. She thought America was more modern, more forgiving, less judgmental. She thought its parties meant freedom. But the society she had stepped into, however loud and lively, was conservative at its core. And Edwina, deadbeat and terribly depressed, turned toward home. She docked at Southampton on the 14th of October. Dickie, on brief leave from the signal school, changed out of uniform and surprised Edwina at the gangplank. She barely reacted. "Dickie there to meet me," she wrote flatly in her diary. Dickie transformed his bedroom at Brooke House into a naval cabin, walls lined with cork, ceilings sprayed white, ventilation ducts installed. A regulation bunk, a folding washstand, 2 brass-framed portholes. A tiny fleet of cut-out ships blinked Morse code across the wall. A button produced the hum of distant engines. In the corner stood his father's naval uniform, displayed in glass. Next door, Edwina slept on satin and swansdown. She still called Patricia the baby in her diary. Not until the child was nearly 2 did she use her name. By 1925, Edwina was declared one of the 6 best-dressed women in the world. In honor of the event, she threw a party where Leslie Hutchinson, Hutch, whom she had first seen in New York, came to perform. He was velvet-voiced and magnetic. Elusive, but never overlooked. He sang not as though asking for attention, but commanding it. Society whispered about his lovers, women, men, sometimes both. He had been companion to royalty. Now he played in her home, while she wrapped a scarf of chiffon around his shoulders. Later, there would be a rumored affair that would shock society. Dickie watched from the margins. By spring 1926, Dickie had completed his course at Greenwich and joined the Centurion for a short assignment with the reserve fleet. He returned often, for polo, ponies, and a new obsession, golf. The pace for Edwina was relentless. Her health began to fail. Month after month, she complained of migraines, cramps, poor digestion. X-rays revealed nothing. Doctors prescribed sleeping drafts, massage, eye drops, electric beams. Her toe became infected, her nerves frayed. She fainted at dinner. She underate, overperformed, and refused glasses because she thought them ugly. And behind it all was the strain of hiding the truth from Dickie. They were called ginks in Mountbatten slang, charming escorts who filled the hours when Dickie was away. Her first real affair was with Hugh Molyneux, heir to the Earl of Sefton. 3 years older, charming, and widely considered the best-looking man in London. It lasted 10 months. When Hugh was posted to India, Edwina moved on, to Stephen Laddie Sanford. Laddie was everything Dickie was not. A Yale man, a champion polo player, a big game hunter, and heir to a fortune. In August 1925, he joined the Mountbattens on holiday in Deauville. From that moment, he and Edwina were inseparable. Dickie, oblivious, carried on until the Prince of Wales told him. David had a queer story about Edwina, Dickie wrote in his diary. I didn't want to believe it, but it was true, and it was just beginning. In London, Edwina and Laddie were seen everywhere. The embassy, the colony, theater boxes, and supper clubs. Dickie hated it, but he couldn't plead ignorance. Sometimes from her bedroom she'd call, "Just in here with Laddie." Friends stopped visiting in the morning. They were too embarrassed. When Laddie left with his polo team, Dickie tried to reclaim his wife. He was met with locked doors and notes like this. "Darling, so sorry I turned you out last night. I think it was the plague." By September 1926, there was someone new. Mike Wardell, tall, magnetic, a black eye patch, a former cavalry officer, recently hired by the Daily Express, rich, rakish, and a friend of Oswald Mosley. He and Edwina became inseparable. Dickie, who later became notorious for his own affairs, at this point still clung to his wife. "No action, however small, of yours passes unnoticed by your spouse," he wrote. "I wish I could flirt with other women, especially my wife. I wish I wasn't pompous. I wish I drove like Bobby Casamori, talked like Peter, shot like my father. I wish I wasn't in the Navy. I wish I had more money to give you better gifts. In other words, I wish I were worthy of your love." Edwina kept the letter. She never replied. On the surface, nothing changed. She hosted Dickie's family, planned fundraisers, and arranged guest lists. But she was unraveling. Lunch with Mike, then saw Laddie, then Mike came to dinner, she noted in her diary. She visited her father, dined with Dickie's niece, checked in on Patricia, who now had whooping cough. The news came buried between nightclub entries. Joined by the Fitzgeralds at the cafe. Very late bed. Patricia has whooping cough. Laddie wanted her to leave Dickie, and the two argued in London, again in Paris. For a time, she pulled away. But when Laddie left for America in June, Edwina felt completely sunk. She went to see Dickie in Yugoslavia. The scenery was beautiful. She felt ill, exhausted, guilty. She bought him a new polo pony, rode side saddle, cheered him on at the aquatic games. It didn't help. 5 years after their wedding, the marriage had quietly broken. Hugh Molyneux returned to London. Laddie was still in America. Edwina and Hugh found each other again. "Danced at the May Fair, serious talk," she wrote. Then Mike returned. Lunch with Hugh. Mike came to dinner. Then Laddie returned. On a particularly chaotic afternoon, a maid at Brooke House neared collapse. Edwina had just returned from a shopping spree. 5 suitors were waiting. "Mr. Gray is in the dining room," the maid announced. "Mr. Sanford is in the library. Mr. Phillips is in the boudoir. Senor Portago is in the anteroom. And I simply don't know what to do with Mr. Molyneux." Edwina was thin, anxious, fraying, her diary filled with headaches and dizzy spells. Her monthly affairs, she told Dickie, were irregular and painful. The doctor blamed her teeth. The dentist blamed her eyes. She left for Paris. Most biographers believe she had an abortion. She told Dickie it was her appendix. Before she left, she confessed, "I felt like ending my life." 3 days later, she was back in London. Then finally, Malta to see Dickie. This time, she brought Patricia. Dickie was overjoyed. The family was whole again. For a few months, the world slowed. They took Patricia paddling, bought her a dollhouse, decorated the Christmas tree, and made plans with joy. But soon he was reassigned to the Queen Elizabeth, then to Egypt. Edwina followed. She loved it, the heat, the monuments, the echo of her mother's past. She wrote pages, bazaars, camels, the Cairo Museum. "My lovely Edwina," Dickie wrote. "Edwina in black shorts, very indecent but very sweet. He was in love. She was not. She looked radiant. But the headaches, the cramps, the bleeding hadn't stopped. Doctors sent her to Paris for x-rays, then to Freiburg for diet therapy. On Dickie's birthday, when they'd planned a trip to Portsmouth, Edwina claimed toothache and went to London with Laddie. Dickie grew ill. Fever, flu, a knee injury. When he recovered, he wanted to try for another child. Edwina claimed poor health. In July, she entered a nursing home in Norfolk Square. A week later, she returned. "Chaste embraces only," she told him. Later, she relented. They tried again. 2 weeks later, Edwina sailed for America. She stayed with the Vanderbilts, then joined Laddie on Long Island. In early October, she thought she might be pregnant. The doctor was cautious. Edwina told Laddie. He asked her to choose, him or Dickie. For a week, they fought. "Nothing but fights and scenes," she wrote. Then the bleeding began. Miscarriage? Hemorrhage? She didn't know. Overnight, Edwina told her maid to pack. She booked her passage. Laddie saw her to the ship and waited until the very last moment before stepping off. She watched him from the rail, felt gloomy and slightly ill, she wrote. But as the ship drew closer to England, her mood lifted. She rejoined the dance of appearances. She wasn't sure if she'd lost a child. She wasn't sure if she was still in love, but she was going home. The doctor confirmed she was pregnant. The baby was due in May. Christmas brought stockings for Patricia and Edwina, a tree, and a family New Year's Eve party. But by spring, the charm had faded. Dickie sailed for maneuvers with the Atlantic and Mediterranean fleets. Edwina followed across Spain, Gibraltar, Rabat, Ronda, Madrid. In Rabat, 7 months pregnant, she rode donkeys. In Madrid, she took the train to Barcelona, where Dickie was playing polo. They checked into the Ritz. It was meant to be a quiet week. Then, on April 19th, Edwina woke in agony. The baby was 5 weeks early, but strong. They named her Pamela. Edwina recovered for 3 weeks, then the cycle continued. On a whim, she and Marjorie sailed for America. The Wall Street crash had gutted the economy, but you wouldn't know it from Edwina's diary. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Mexico, New Orleans, Florida, Edwina saw only architecture, hotel lobbies, and luxury. She met Ronald Colman, Larry Gray, and Ted Phillips, a charming Spanish-speaking companion from Mexico City. She wrote 5 letters to Dickie in 6 weeks. She cabled regularly. Once or twice, she called. While Edwina wandered, Dickie worked. He'd become head of wireless instruction at the signal school. He rewrote every technical manual, built a drawing school, bought his own color printer when the Admiralty refused. Each morning, he visited Patricia. He took her to the Natural History Museum. They rode ponies together. When she fell from Rusty and broke her arm, Dickie carried her home. He cabled Edwina. She was furious. She blamed him for not watching her closely enough, for asking too much of her. It wasn't fair, but Dickie didn't argue. Edwina had never been a natural mother. In photographs with Patricia, there was always space between them. When she placed an arm around her daughter, she smiled. At the camera, not the child. Pamela was different. Perhaps because Patricia turned easily to Dickie, Edwina became possessive of her younger daughter. She wanted all of her. When Dickie returned to Adsdean in July 1929, he found himself shut out. Nanny said his visits disturbed the baby. Edwina agreed. He stayed away. Her albums told the story, many pictures of mother and child, none of the father and daughter. In those images, Edwina looked pale, drawn. Abroad, in Paris, America, Russia, she sparkled. At home, she was always unwell. One evening at Brooke House, with Laddie Sanford at dinner, Edwina collapsed. "I feel faint," she said, and sent the guests to the theater. 3 days later, the doctor made his diagnosis, a severe internal infection. Septicemia was possible. Emergency surgery was required. Months passed. Electric therapy, massage. She learned to walk again. Her reappearance came at the Midnight Review, a charity performance at the London Pavilion. The theater was packed. Edwina floated in white silk, white camellias, and a diamond coronet. She looked like a ghost. The audience knew she had been ill. That night, she was not just glamorous, but sacred. By 1931, the parties resumed. She sailed to the West Indies. In Havana, she saw Larry Gray. In Mexico, Ted Phillips. Then Laddie arrived. It became a dance of management. Lunched with Larry very late, having driven in with Ted at 90 miles an hour and been arrested on the way. Laddie came for dinner, Cotton Club, home very late. 3 months of sunshine, 3 months of fantasy. Dickie received 4 letters. By spring, everything was slipping. Patricia caught chickenpox. Then Pamela. Still, Edwina stayed away, crisscrossing Cuba in a private Pullman, her photos appearing in papers beside various men. Then came the letter. His cousin who had seen Edwina in Cuba wrote to Dickie. Edwina was disgracing herself, disgracing the Mountbattens, disgracing the Cassels. Dickie was stunned. He called her, told her to come home. She refused. Worst night since Papa died. Dickie wrote in his diary. Then came the gossip. The New York papers said Edwina Mountbatten was seeking a divorce, that she was planning to marry Douglas Fairbanks, that she was headed to Cuernavaca. She cabled Dickie, "Call me between 8 and 9 Mexican time." She insisted it was all nonsense, everyone treating the whole thing as a joke. Dickie tried to believe her, but in London, the story spread. He was humiliated. This time, he demanded she return. When she did, he confronted her. She brushed him off, went to cocktails, then left to see Laddie. That was the last straw. That night at Brooke House, Dickie sat her down. "You've lost the ability to frighten me," he said. "I used to become meek or rude. Now I'm just calm." They agreed. The marriage was over. But that night, she came to him in his bedroom. They talked. They would not separate. They would evolve. Separate beds, some separate lives. And in agreement, Edwina could look elsewhere. But discreetly, to outsiders, it seemed a marriage of convenience. That Dickie needed her money, that Edwina liked his title. But they misunderstood. Dickie still needed her. And though she was less dependent, she hadn't found a love strong enough to pull her away. "Were Hugh and Laddie serious?" he asked. "I suppose you'd call them serious," she replied. "But they never changed my affection or respect for you. You're a very sweet person," she added. "I love you very much. I want you to be as great a friend to me as I am to you," Dickie wrote. "The lovely Edwina Mountbatten," he wrote, "far more fun, far more sweet than the girl I idealized. Now I see why all the world loves her." And Edwina, for once, responded, "You'll never know how much your devotion and long-suffering have meant to me. You are my best friend in all the world." There was little thrill in affairs conducted under a husband's indulgent gaze. It unnerved her lovers to realize they were being tolerated rather than feared. The secrecy was gone. The thrill had dulled. Hugh drifted away. Laddie sailed back to America. Then another crisis. For years, it had been Dickie who worried about money. Now it was Edwina. Between 1929 and 1931, their expenses had spiraled. Brooke House was the greatest burden. 27 staff when they were in residence, 17 when they were away. Between autumn 1930 and autumn 1931, the house alone cost nearly £16,000. And so reluctantly, they decided to sell. Sir Ernest's will had forbidden it. Lawyers were called, negotiations dragged on, items were auctioned. In the end, the house itself could not be sold, so they had it demolished. On the rubble of the old Brooke House, a sleek 8-story block of flats rose. The Mountbattens would take the top 2 floors, and in the midst of financial upheaval, they left for Malta as tax exiles. In Malta, Edwina tried. She entertained, threw picnics, hosted coastal dinners, and sailed on yachts. For a moment, life seemed still. The air was warm, the gossip quiet. Patricia and Pamela played on rocky beaches. Her husband was admired, her schedule structured. For once, no one was chasing anyone. Then came the scandal. In May 1932, the People ran a blind item under the headline, "Society Shaken by Terrible Scandal." It concerns one of the leading hostesses in the country, a woman highly connected and immensely rich. Her association with a colored man became so marked that they were the talk of the West End. She has been told to leave the country, and the hint came from a quarter which cannot be ignored. There was no name, but everyone knew. The woman was Edwina. The quarter was Buckingham Palace. Dickie was furious. "That vulgar socialist paper has published the most outrageous libel," he wrote to his mother. "We cannot let it go unanswered." The case went to court. Both Edwina and Dickie were permitted to testify. On the stand, she was composed, unshakable. The judge ruled in her favor. The paper printed an apology. No damages were claimed. That night, they dined at Buckingham Palace. The next day, the Prince of Wales hosted a farewell party in their honor. The man in question was widely assumed to be Paul Robeson. Perhaps she never had an affair with him. But later, it was confirmed to be Leslie Hutchinson, Hutch. She had first met him in Harlem in 1925. He played at her parties. She gave him gifts, a gold cigarette case, a gold codpiece. He appeared at Brooke House in Paris, in London salons and Harlem clubs. He was velvet-voiced, magnetic, untouchable. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need it. His lovers, it was said, included Princess Marina, Cole Porter, Ivor Novello, and Edwina. He would remain part of her world for decades. But the scandal had consequences. For years, Edwina had written the rules. Her affairs were tolerated, her independence admired. But now, the press was circling, the palace was watching. And in 1932, Dickie fell in love. Her name was Yola Letellier. She was the much younger wife of Henri Letellier, a French newspaper magnate. Yola was witty, serene, beautiful, and very quiet. After the brutal honesty of the previous summer, Edwina had tried to reignite the marriage. But the flame had cooled. Dickie was still fond of his wife, but she no longer thrilled him, but Yola did. The discovery hit Edwina like a thunderclap. She had never imagined Dickie with a mistress of his own. Affairs were hers to conduct, not his. He was meant to admire, to forgive. She packed her bags and left for Paris, not to end it, to meet her. "Your girl is sweet, and I like her, and we got on beautifully. I am lunching with her at her house on Tuesday." It was a performance, part charm, part diplomacy, part control. If Yola was to remain in their lives, it would be on Edwina's terms. It was not approval, it was strategy. And in that quiet exchange, one woman's grace, another's patience, the Mountbattens' marriage shifted. Not broken, not healed, but for the first time equal. Over time, Edwina and Yola became more than companions. They were a living portrait of intimacy, inseparable in motion and mood. They shared rooms without ceremony, moved together through train stations and hotel lobbies. The effect did not go unnoticed. "I have never in any way tried to pinch her from you," Edwina assured Dickie, whose jealousy flared not just for Yola, but for the parts of Edwina he no longer understood or owned. In Monte Carlo, Count Anthony Sapari reemerged. Tall, golden-haired, his Hungarian charm burnished by a movie star smile. Yola had first introduced them in Budapest. Now he waited at the Grand Prix, and soon he was Edwina's lover. Some biographers whisper he belonged to Dickie too. What had once been tolerated now seemed understood. They shared more than space, perhaps in flickering moments, even affection. Then came Bunny, Harold "Bunny" Phillips, 8 years her junior, 6'5", a guards officer with a private income and a pilot's license. Floated through life with a golden serenity that stood in direct opposition to Dickie's manic orchestration of details down to cufflink angles and candlelight. With Bunny, Edwina could breathe. He became her Yola. "We loved having Bunny in our home," Pamela Mountbatten would later recall. "He made my mother easier to be around. He invented games, wrote us letters, brought joy. To us, he was just part of the family." Together, Bunny and Edwina moved across the map like a waking dream. Carnival in Rio, horses in the Andes, uprisings in Bolivia, rickshaws slipping through moonlit streets. In a hotel under siege, they played cards and laughed like children, ignoring the thunder of the world. When Dickie departed on a summer cruise, Edwina crossed to Paris with Yola, then headed east with Bunny. They bathed in jungle lakes, read aloud in hammocks, and slept on Chinese junks beneath stars that blinked like distant promises. "Quite perfect," she wrote. They wandered Bali, Borneo, Manchuria. In Kuching, she was mistaken for royalty. "Waving and shaking hands till I really thought I was," she laughed. By the close of 1934, Edwina held everything. A husband who remained devoted, a lover who asked little, and a life suspended in a velvet net of indulgence and escape. But war, like a whisper through lace, gathered at the edges. Bunny and Yola moved in. "We're practically communal now," Edwina joked. But the arrangement, though open, was never easy. She bristled when Dickie lingered near Bunny, sulked when he paid Yola too much attention. Her moods shifted with the tide, radiant in 1 hour, raging the next. Their 13th wedding anniversary passed in Paris, spent with Bunny and Yola. Dickie gave her a gold box engraved with Roman numerals. She gave him a Cartier stopwatch. Then she vanished again. Patricia and Pamela were sent to Budapest. Edwina meandered across Europe. By November, as the season waned and leaves fell in cities she could no longer distinguish by mood or skyline, Edwina remembered the children. The nanny, desperate, had dressed them in pink flannel. When the hotel announced its closure, Edwina realized she no longer remembered where she had left them. She set off with Yola, located the girls, and promptly sent them to Germany. Then turned east once more with Bunny. "You're so understanding," she wrote to Dickie. "I like you to know." Together, she and Bunny moved through Peking, the Moluccas, Hong Kong, and Japan, as if time itself had been momentarily suspended for their pleasure. But it had not. In 1936, the world tilted. King George V died that January. His son David, now Edward VIII, took the throne. Dickie imagined the new king would seek his counsel. He was only partly right. Where Dickie once whispered advice, another voice had risen. Wallis Simpson. The Mountbattens had long known the Prince of Wales. They'd often joined him during his affair with Frida Dudley Ward. But by 1934, Frida was gone, and when the prince arrived at Brooke House that autumn, it was Wallis on his arm. Wallis found Dickie exhausting, forever lobbying, forever urgent. Edwina, by contrast, with her languid grace and unaffected charm, made Wallis feel artificial. The story accelerated. Wallis filed for divorce. The government panicked. The press, once complicit in silence, stirred. The Mountbattens stood near enough to feel the gears grinding, but wise enough to stay quiet. When the abdication came, they pivoted their loyalties without guilt. "Tea with Queen Mary," Edwina scribbled. "Cocktails with the king and queen." That winter, they took the children to Switzerland. Bunny and Yola joined them. There was snow, light, and illness. Pamela ran a fever. Bunny's back gave out. Dickie vanished mid-trip to buy technical drawing supplies. In May, Hitler and Mussolini signed the Pact of Steel. Refugees poured into London. Edwina, moved by the stories of flight and fear, joined Jewish aid committees, sent money to strangers, and offered quiet support to those who arrived with nothing but names. Her own Jewish ancestry, once barely considered, now throbbed with significance. Then came the call. Her father was dying. She rushed to Broadlands and found the house not in mourning, but in confusion, chaotic with staff, memories, and silence. There was nothing to be done. Wilfred died on July 3rd. Terribly sad losing Daddy, she wrote. Really heartbroken, but for his sake, it's best. That night, she couldn't sleep, pacing to his room twice, once alone and once with Molly. The world outside stirred ominously. At Brooke House, gas masks were inspected, maids drilled for evacuation. She passed her ARP exam, began home nursing, and listened to Hitler's broadcasts with growing unease. On September 3rd, war was declared. Dickie remained in Portsmouth. Only when one faces the prospect of death, he wrote, does one realize how much one's loved ones mean. She sent him letters, scarves, jars of honey, kittens, and money for the shipboard bathroom. 17 years of marriage, he wrote, and I wouldn't marry anyone else if I had to live it all over again. Even old jealousies softened. Thanks for sending Yola's letter, he added. I'm glad you didn't open it. I wouldn't open one from the rabbit either. Edwina, continuing to try and help, offered Broadlands as a hospital. No reply. Applied to the WVS, rejected. Tried the WAAF, the WRNS, even St. John, refused her. To the committees, Edwina was a headline, a name in pearls, not a nurse in boots. She was too known, too glamorous, a socialite playing war. So she found another way in. In April, she was named president of the Hampshire Nursing Division, and soon boxes began to spill into her Kensington Palace flat. Bandages, reports, uniforms, supplies, each one a symbol of the chaos she was learning to orchestrate. Then, on the 10th of May, Germany invaded Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Chamberlain resigned. Churchill rose. And Dickie, already at sea aboard the Kelly, was thrown into the storm. The Kelly was struck on the 9th, 50 feet of hull destroyed, 27 men dead. With no power, Dickie called for a tow. For 91 hours, they were rammed by enemy boats, strafed by German fighters, and nearly capsized. When the line snapped on the second night, Dickie evacuated most of his crew, dumped ballast by hand, and stayed behind, waiting in silence for the ocean to decide if she would spare what remained of his ship. It was instinct, he said later, but others called it something more. One of the war's most daring recoveries, the press roared. He couldn't bear to leave her to the enemy. Back in London, Edwina was spinning through a different kind of combat. By summer 1940, she was moving faster than ever, organizing lectures, selecting Red Cross volunteers, hunting for space to launch a new center for intensive training. She dodged air raids, navigated blackouts, and fielded calls on a phone that rang without mercy. But something darker stirred beneath the busyness. If Britain fell, what would happen to the Mountbattens? Edwina was Jewish by descent, so were her daughters. Dickie was a royal cousin and a naval officer. They knew the Nazis kept lists and assumed they were on one, so Edwina devised a plan. She would buy a boat, hire a captain and 2 deckhands, and sail to Florida with the girls. 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. It was absurd. They had no trained crew, no wartime clearance, and no assurance they'd survive the Channel, let alone the ocean. Then, in June, France fell, and Edwina hesitated. Instead, she sent Patricia and Pamela to America. Too sad and all in tears, she wrote. But when she heard that the King and Queen were keeping Elizabeth and Margaret in London, she wondered, had she acted too soon? By autumn, there was no time to wonder. We're certainly in the front line now, she wrote to her daughters. But don't worry, I'm getting pretty nippy at dodging what I don't want to come into contact with. She meant bombs. Masonry, glass, flames, limbs. Every night brought a new geometry of ruin. Edwina enrolled in a nursing course. From 9 to 6, she studied machine gun wounds, burns, amputations, and shock trauma. Tatler covered the course, photographing her gleaming hair and crisp uniform, outshining every other trainee. Applications soared, but Edwina didn't want glamour. She wanted blood and bedpans. At Westminster Hospital, she pushed stretchers, fetched supplies, fainted once during surgery, and recovered. When the Blitz began, there was no time for queasiness. Awful lacerations, fractures, amputations, plate glass injuries, she wrote. She endured it all. Bombs shrieked nightly across London. Worst night I've spent, she wrote. House shaking to pieces. 3 bombs fell near the training center. Brooke House was struck directly, destroying the penthouse. "At least we can get out of the rent," she joked. Dickie, now stationed at Immingham, had little to do. He played golf with Bunny, watched films, and on the Mountbatten's 18th anniversary, he and Bunny celebrated together. Then, in late November, disaster again. The Javelin, Dickie's new command, was torpedoed off the coast of France. 46 men were killed. Some whispered that he had hesitated, maneuvered too slowly. Others said he had performed well. Patricia and Pamela, safe in New York, wrote letters of pride. "Exactly like last time," Patricia wrote. Others noticed the pattern too. By the end of 1940, Edwina was doing the best work of her life, and she knew it. In October, she began touring the city's shelters, tunnels, basements, tube stations. They were dark, overcrowded, and ill-equipped. First aid posts were manned by volunteers running 12-hour shifts with no central authority. Edwina was appalled. She returned with a report and left with a new title: Director of all St. John volunteers in shelters, rest centers, and aid posts. But this was no desk job. Edwina hit the streets. She drove through blackout-curtained alleys and rubble-strewn roads, flashing her emergency pass at checkpoints. If the sirens sounded, she went toward the fire. Holborn, Piccadilly, Stepney, each shelter every 2 weeks. Quiet questions, sharp eyes. Volunteers stood straighter when she appeared. She missed nothing. She often returned at 5 in the morning. "Completely lost," she wrote, but she never stopped. And the city began to whisper. Edwina was everywhere. She briefed the king and queen, berated ministers, and dismissed those she felt had failed the public. Sir John Anderson called her a terror, the real oppressor of Bengal. She didn't suffer fools, no matter how many stars on their shoulders. To the women she led, she was something else entirely, glamorous, relentless, and present. After 16-hour days, she'd vanish for a facial at Elizabeth Arden, lunch at the Mirabelle, then dine with Prince George after shelter rounds. She ran the nursing flying squad, oversaw VADs, managed the knitting depot, selected Red Cross volunteers. Her older colleagues, expecting a diva, found instead a woman who remembered birthdays, followed up on illness, and adored animals. She got lost in blackouts, got carsick, mislaid her glasses. But even with fever, earache, or aching feet, she pressed on. In January 1941, she was promoted, Lady District Officer and Acting Deputy District Superintendent, just 2 ranks from the top. By spring, Broadlands had been converted into a hospital, and Edwina Mountbatten had found her front line. "The hospital people are charming, and so grateful," she wrote, as Broadlands shifted from private estate to improvised infirmary, the rooms rearranged, the rhythms repurposed. In May, Dickie returned home. That night, incendiaries rained down. The roof caught fire, and through smoke and soot, Edwina, Dickie, and Bunny battled flames with buckets in hand and boots soaked through before dawn broke over the scorched grounds. In rare moments of stillness, they dined without occasion, and sometimes they danced. "I love dancing with you," Dickie said. "Our steps fit better now, just as our lives do." War had brought them into rhythm. He, forged by danger at sea. She, tempered by rubble, ration books, and the moaning silence of the wounded. They had each been tested, and each had endured. The tension that had once defined them had loosened its grip. Edwina no longer recoiled from his emotional demands, and the truths they had avoided for years now existed comfortably in the space between them. Dickie had long been disinterested in sex, referring to it as psychology and hydraulics, and Edwina, too, had come to view it less as intimacy than intrusion. Her affairs had never been driven by lust, but by the need for air, freedom. In those early years, she had no purpose to shield her, no task to chase. Then came Bunny, calm, undemanding, kind, a refuge rather than a flame. And Dickie, remarkably, tenderly, allowed it. "I love you so much," he told her, "and I like him better than all your friends. He's nicer than me." What had once been her secret had, in a quiet way, become something shared. But it was not Bunny who set her free. It was her work. Edwina led with clarity, discipline, and a purpose she had never tasted before. At last, something in her life was hers alone. That autumn, Dickie took command of the Illustrious, an aircraft carrier undergoing repairs in Norfolk, Virginia. He would be away for months. Edwina, determined not to be idle, joined him in America, intent on rallying support for Britain's cause. They arrived in New York on August 19th, stepping into a world of cocktail parties, white-glove diplomacy, and unfamiliar deference. It wasn't the journey that unnerved her. It was the stage. At Newport, before her first public appearance, her hands shook and her head pounded. But when she stood in uniform, the words came. Her voice did not falter. She could hold a room. In New York, she faced the British War Relief Board, 18 skeptical men in tailored suits, and won them over. Confidence followed. Her figure, striking in monochrome, her large, myopic eyes seeming to settle on everyone at once. She needed no dramatics. The story she told, of children in rubble, of nurses with bleeding hands, of cities in shadow, was enough. By autumn 1941, she was everywhere. St. Louis, Detroit, Chicago. She spoke to school children, Red Cross units, factory women. She toured the Packard plant, dined with 600 club women, and scribbled in her diary, all seemed rather drunk, but very sweet. Dickie, meanwhile, gave speeches, played polo, and led a mock British naval attack on Pearl Harbor. If you're ever attacked, he warned, you'll lose all your planes. In Washington, she arrived to brass bands. In Philadelphia, to cheers. By late September, she had brought Patricia to California, where luncheons, rallies, and committee teas ran until 2:30 in the morning and began again at 8. Back in New York, they gathered at the Vanderbilt's Fifth Avenue mansion. Edwina tried to offer her daughters something like normalcy, ice cream, matinees, the rodeo. But she never stopped moving. So tired I could cry, she wrote. 17 years earlier, she had honeymooned here. Now she and Dickie were a public unit. He in white, she in black, the warrior and the healer. Photographs captured them mid-step, mid-glance, flawless and still. I feel closer to you now than at any time in the last 10 or 12 years, he confessed. Before leaving, he arranged Bunny's travel to America. We should dislike each other, he mused, but I can't help feeling affection for the old rabbit. Patricia and Pamela never forgot it, their mother at ease, unhurried, almost tender. But Bunny's arrival shifted the balance again. He took the girls to How Green Was My Valley and weekend in Havana. On Edwina's final night, she scrambled eggs in his apartment, just the two of them. Then she boarded a train for Canada. There, the pace turned punishing. 5 inspections a day, trains at midnight, sleep in snatches. In Ottawa, Princess Alice received her formally. She's changed, Alice wrote to Queen Mary. She works hard. She's clever. We thought she was just a butterfly, but the wars brought out something else. London agreed. Edwina had made Americans feel what Britain endured. Her speeches had crossed the ocean like signals. 6 days later, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. The United States joined the war. What kept her afloat were small mercies. Pamela arrived safely from Lisbon. She walked the dogs. Celebrated Noel Coward's birthday, took the young princesses to a pantomime at Windsor. Churchill appointed Dickie chief of combined operations, a role that finally matched his drive. Raids, strategy, coordination. Edwina's work, meanwhile, multiplied. At St. John, the president fell ill. At the depot, Lady Pound collapsed and Edwina assumed control of both posts. Reports surged in. Hospitals, shelters, aid stations. Lists of needs. Boots, bandages, beds, blood. She read late into the night, marking margins in red. She gave up rest. Gave up hours. This was her war, not the one with cameras or citations, but the quieter battle waged behind curtains, fought with conviction and paper cuts. At Broadlands, the wards swelled with convalescents. Volunteers thinned. In March, Patricia returned home and ran straight into her parents, arms on the platform at Paddington. Then in summer, she was appointed Superintendent-in-Chief of the Nursing Division of St. John Ambulance, the highest post a woman could hold. She now oversaw 70,000 adult volunteers and 10,000 cadets. She inspected hospitals, blood banks, ARP posts, opened bazaars, led parades, and signed appeals by lamplight. She traveled between 5 towns in a day, sometimes speaking at each. Her only respite was 2 quiet days at Broadlands with Bunny, walking under trees, neither of them needing to speak. In January, she was awarded the CBE. She folded the note of congratulations, set it aside, and returned to her desk. The first 5 months of 1943 were the hardest Edwina had known. Each day began too early and ended too late. On Friday, 26th of February, she opened with a civil defense meeting, followed by 2 more appointments, one with the Director General of Medical Services, then hosted a working lunch with as many friends as she could find. That night, she barely made it upstairs. "Dined in my room. Exhausted," she wrote. Dickie fared no better. He worked 18-hour days, gave 16 speeches in 48 hours, and was often summoned by Churchill in the small hours. Then everything changed. On August 28th, Churchill and Roosevelt appointed Dickie Supreme Allied Commander, Southeast Asia. Everything west of Saigon, his. He wanted Edwina with him. "You've been such a help, with people, with judgment, with your brutally frank advice. Wouldn't it be romantic to live again where we got engaged?" But Edwina had no intention of going. Not yet. She had her own work. She stayed at Broadlands with Bunny. It was their final weekend together. He, too, was headed to Southeast Asia, doing intelligence work for Dickie's chief of staff. They walked the grounds, said little, said everything. When he left in mid-October, Dickie assured her that letters for Bunny could be slipped discreetly into the diplomatic pouch of the Supreme Commander. But the house felt different. The air raids had begun again. The afternoons were dark by 3. Shops closed early. Edwina fell ill, feverish, shivering, but refused to rest. "Every day I'm on parade," she said. In between meetings, she helped Irving Berlin mount This Is the Army, a musical fundraiser at the Palladium. She supported Dickie from afar. Her letters were full of pride. "You've put new hope into your entire command," she told him. "Everyone says so." There was no jealousy now. She had her own reputation, her own center of gravity. Dickie, meanwhile, had begun an affair with Jeannie Lindsay, a married socialite 20 years his junior, who was also quietly involved with Bunny Phillips. Then came D-Day. On June 6th, the Allies stormed Normandy, using the very plans, maps, and tactics Dickie had helped develop. In his theater, things moved more slowly. He proposed a southern assault in Burma. The chiefs rejected it. Churchill approved in principle, but would not overrule. He also missed Bunny. "The rabbit and I parted nearly in tears," Dickie wrote. "We used to ride every evening, talk and talk. Funny, I never really got to know him before." Edwina replied with understanding. "I can quite understand why you're so fond of him," she wrote. "He has a fine, straightforward character." She did more than sympathize. Dickie had written in anger about the state of military hospitals in India, short-staffed, undersupplied, poorly managed. He'd requested 700 nurses. None had come. Edwina petitioned. She lobbied. Promises were made. Still, nothing arrived. Finally, she snapped. "Maybe I should go to India myself," she said. "See what's needed, then come back with a plan." But before she could depart, there was one last reunion. Bunny came back to London after more than 8 months away. His letters had been vague, and Edwina was confused. "I don't understand what the rabbit's movements mean," she told Dickie. She feared he had changed. But by then, so had she. In January, she had met Bill Paley, the founder of CBS, newly arrived from Eisenhower's staff. Brilliant, charming, generous. Their connection was immediate. From February to June, Edwina and Paley were nearly inseparable. He admired her wit. She admired his clarity. They fit. Bunny knew. He came to Broadlands to tell her. He was ending their relationship. He was engaged to Gina Werner. Edwina was heartbroken, and Dickie was nearly as stunned. He had decided that if she and Bunny wished to marry, he would not object. "I had intended to offer to make it easy for you," he admitted. "My one thought was to help you." Years later, he would have an affair with Bunny's daughter. She was 20. He was 65. He would call her the only other great love of his life. In late October 1944, Edwina was cleared to travel. Her mission was vast, to inspect hospitals, clearing stations, welfare centers, and troop rest arrangements across India, Ceylon, Burma, and Chungking. Dickie was delighted. "My medical staff are thrilled," he wrote. "The mere fact that you're coming will put everyone on their toes." 25 years earlier, he had told her to pack sun hats. Now he sent her off with bedrolls, mosquito boots, and insect repellent, asking her to do what he could not, kick his hospital staff into shape. Her official itinerary allowed for 1 hospital visit a day. She doubled it. "I want to see what isn't on the schedule," she told Dickie. "That's the only way to spot the difference between real care and window dressing." In Cairo, she inspected relief teams preparing for Greece. In Baghdad, she toured the RAF hospital. The final leg to India was brutal, overnight, unheated, and sleepless. She slept in a lower bunk with her feet resting on a general's head. By the time they reached Karachi, the party was numb with exhaustion. There were no parades, no luncheons, no courtesies waiting for her. Just rows of Navy hostels, YMCA centers, and under-equipped hospitals. Each evening, she returned to write full reports, send cables, draft thank you letters, and log new requests. And always, she asked to see what others preferred to hide. In Delhi, the tone was no different. There were no garden parties, no receptions, only meetings. She was only just beginning. In early 1945, Edwina launched her most grueling mission yet, a sweeping inspection across India, Burma, and Ceylon. Her evenings were spent not with dignitaries, but with surgeons, nurses, orderlies, and volunteers. Her only outing was a hospital dance in Bangalore, organized to lift the spirits of patients recovering from surgery. Then came Bombay. She and Dickie spent 3 days together, though they were labeled rest days. They toured the bomb-damaged docks, shook hands with inspectors, and returned each night to compare notes. Then she was gone again. She flew to Jhansi, unannounced. The hospital was adequate, but the staff didn't know each other's names. Word spread quickly. Lady Louis was no longer following the schedule. She had no patience for excuses. She traveled by ambulance train, by jeep, by military aircraft, by truck, and sometimes on foot, carrying not just luggage, but the war's administrative burden on her back. When her jeep stalled in a spring tide, she waded through waist-high water with her clothes on her head, then flagged down a 3-ton lorry and arrived drenched but smiling. Still, she missed nothing. Each hospital became a case study, each camp a checklist. In Madras, she reviewed 600 members of St. John Ambulance. Then she went to the front. Over 10 days, she moved camp to camp, watching jaw surgeries, breathing the stench of rotting bodies, dodging mines, sleeping under parachute silk, and driving to within 500 yards of Japanese lines. The men were stunned. "A woman? You?" they said. "They nearly died," she wrote with a laugh. By March, she had crossed into China. She and Dickie flew over the Himalayas to Kunming, where he disappeared into briefings, and she vanished into blood banks, orphanages, delousing stations, and supply rooms. In Paushan, she inspected the local hospital, then drove the Burma Road. Narrow, dangerous, corkscrewing up and down 8,000-foot mountain passes, she noted dryly in her diary. By the end of the tour, she had a complete diagnosis of an army's medical soul. She didn't just inspect, she observed, she remembered, she reported, and she changed everything she touched. After weeks of travel, heat, and constant reporting, she announced, quietly and to everyone's disbelief, that she would travel south from Dimapur by third-class leave train, the same way the soldiers did. The conditions stunned her. No lights, no food, no washing facilities, just a slit in the floor, she wrote. The trains are filthy. Her ears ached. She took sleeping pills. She did not sleep, but she carried on. 4 days later, she returned to Delhi for a final round of press briefings. Then she and Dickie flew to Bikaner, where they spent 36 hours with their old friend, the Maharaja. No champagne, just gardens, hospital rounds, Indian music, and Edwina drifting into sleep to the sound of sitars and ceiling fans. She returned to England in mid-April and resumed work immediately. She reported to the Joint War Organization. Her words galvanized the room. Hospitals needed drugs, beds, fans, boots, mosquito netting, soap. The list was long and raw. Everyone agreed, but action proved harder. "All waffling around and achieving very little," she wrote to Dickie. "But I'll keep prodding." He wrote to the king, to family, to every committee chair. He used her reports in his own inspections. His staff in India were astonished. He knew exactly where the problems were, because she had told him. "I'm so proud of all you've done," she wrote back. "This new closeness, it's made me very happy." It was the 4th time they had rebuilt their marriage. This time, it felt real. In early May, Rangoon fell. Victory in Burma. "Really magnificent," Edwina wrote. Hitler was dead, Berlin had fallen, and on May 7th, Germany surrendered. World War II ended with a bomb, then silence. On August 6th, Hiroshima. On August 9th, Nagasaki. Edwina wrote nothing in her diary. Like most, she understood little, only that the sky had been torn apart and something unspeakable had closed the world's throat. 36 hours later, at 2 a.m, she boarded a flight to Southeast Asia. No one could have written the role that awaited her. Southeast Asia Command stretched across 1 million square miles. Jungles, islands, cities without light. 500,000 Japanese soldiers still wandered its borders, some unaware the war was over. And somewhere in that haunted sprawl were the Allied prisoners, more than 120,000, forgotten, broken, wasting away in camps that had long stopped being camps and had become something closer to hell. They needed rescuing. Not next month, not next week. Now. On August 23rd, Edwina arrived. She did not linger. Rangoon was her first descent. The heat hit like grief. Planes touched down with the hollow-eyed, the rag-bound, the near-dead. She moved from bed to bed, collecting names, fragments of story, messages that barely made sense. Grim tales, she wrote. Unbelievable what they've endured. Thailand followed. Generals warned her away. The port was mined, the airstrip wrecked, the land full of still-armed ghosts. At the airfield, one prisoner whispered that she was the first white woman he'd seen in 3 years. In Tamuang, 5,000 waited in rags. Well, she said, you all smell. They howled with laughter. She handed out cigarettes. Real players, Virginia, they gasped. At Chanjigal, she walked among 12,000 survivors. One man handed her a $10 Japanese note, a bamboo sliver, and asked for her autograph. He had no ink, so he offered his blood. She signed without hesitation. In Sumatra, the horror deepened. Prisoners had died by the thousands from malaria and starvation. In Semarang, Java, 12,000 women and children were packed into compounds without air, water, or rest. Edwina ordered immediate evacuation. When an officer offered to carry her bag, she smiled and said, "My husband always makes me carry my own." She flew to the Philippines, then to Hong Kong. In Manila, she promised a British engineer he'd be home by Christmas. 10 years later, they met again at a flower show. "You remembered," he whispered. "I never forget," she said. When she finally returned to Singapore, Dickie had just arrived from Rangoon, and Patricia came from Delhi. For a fortnight, they became a family again. They drove, laughed, danced. Log fires at night, Edwina wrote, and brilliant sun by day. We laughed a good deal. On November 24th, she returned to Java, exhausted, determined. Her diary grew sparse, her letters shorter. Tense with fear, she wrote. She held meetings in battered hospitals, drafted joint relief plans by lantern light, and stayed just until her strength gave out. On November 25th, she began the journey home. She wept. "I've loved my time out here," she told Dickie, "and I'm so glad you feel it all went off well." In a final letter, she wrote of surrender ceremonies and Ceylon sunsets, of pride, of partnership, of the joy, not of power, but of being useful. On her 44th birthday, a letter arrived. "If you weren't my wife," Dickie wrote, "I'd offer you permanent employment, in a very high rank, on my staff. And I know of no other woman I'd say that to." The sun had left fine lines across her once porcelain skin, but her eyes still caught the light, and her carriage remained unbent. Her gowns, once tailored to perfection, now fell a little looser over her reed-thin frame. Fashion seemed faintly absurd after the war. But in uniform, she was still magnificent. London was pale and cold, and she moved to a house beside her old address, bare, underfurnished, its pipes clattering and its oven cold. "Food on trays out of a tin," she wrote, "and the cold is intense." On New Year's Day, the phone rang. She had been made a Dame Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, but Edwina was not done. By February's end, she sailed east again to witness final evacuations, to inspect Red Cross efforts in Malaya and Java, to lend her name once more to the work that never quite released her. Dickie urged her to rest. Indian princes sent invitations. The King of Siam extended a royal welcome, but she declined the marigolds and courtesies. She went because the work still called. On March 17th, she arrived in Singapore, swept into a Red Cross conference, just as dignitaries began to descend. Among them was a man she had never met, but whose presence would shift the course of her life, Jawaharlal Nehru. Some of Dickie's staff advised caution. Nehru was political, volatile, but when an overzealous official denied him transportation, Dickie sent his own car. The two men arrived at the YMCA side by side, climbing the steps to the cheer of a crowd expecting protest and witnessing something rarer, grace. Inside, Edwina waited. When Nehru entered, a surge of supporters swept her beneath a table. She emerged laughing, brushing off the chaos. Introductions were made over upturned chairs. From that moment, they never looked back. She returned to Singapore. There were temples, dances, a brief escape to the hills. "Log fires at night," she wrote, "and brilliant sun by day. I let the world fall quiet." It was the only rest she allowed herself. She had done all she could, not just once, again and again, through ash and flood, through borders and camps with a spine held straight by duty and grace. And finally, Edwina Mountbatten went home, but peace did not follow her. Dickie wanted the Navy again. Any ship, any post, any sky that smelled of salt. Edwina looked at houses in Malta. They dined with ministers, lunched with royalty. The American Red Cross gave her silver, the Belgians gold. Most of the gratitude came in whispers. Queen Mary saving her a seat at Wimbledon, the Archbishop of Canterbury inviting her to tea. But it was not enough. She found herself once more fitting her life around Dickie's. The old calendar returned, and with it, the faint suffocation of parties she no longer recognized. When friends recalled pre-war parties, Edwina looked away. She didn't remember, or didn't want to. She was lonely, lost. And then, possible new horror job, she scribbled in her diary. No one said it aloud, but the Crown was readying its final act in India, and Dickie, loyal and dazzling as ever, had been chosen to carry the last burden of empire. Immediately, she rewrote the court circular. No longer would the Vicereine receive according to rank. "We don't honor people with our presence," she said. "We invite and we attend." It wasn't symbolic. It was a shift in gravity of what the crown meant and how it moved through lives that had long looked on with wary eyes. And so Edwina Mountbatten, the last Vicereine of India, began her final performance, not as an empress in pearls, but as a woman of reform, of presence, of purpose. It was not easy to unmake centuries of ritual. The Mountbattens refused the illusion of royalty, but still moved through rooms lined with lion-headed door handles and the ghost breath of empire. Edwina tossed out the old guest list, a dusty registry of signatures in the book, and invited those shaping India's future: poets, social workers, skeptics, dissidents. "Only 6 of the Indian guests at our first garden party," she wrote, "had ever been inside Viceroy's house. The invitation was not ceremony, it was correction." Among the British women in Delhi, many bristled. For years, they had drawn a social line between themselves and Indian women. Edwina now crossed it daily, arm in arm with Gandhi's friends, soft-spoken with socialists, unbothered by snubs. The heat rose, 106 degrees and climbing. Her nerves throbbed, but she worked harder. Within days, she was meeting the YWCA, the Welfare League, the All India Women's Conference. She visited military wards, maternity clinics, caste shelters. She sent letters home, not of ceremony, but of sorrow. "The trouble," she wrote, "is not religion. It is illiteracy, neglect. 1 in 5 children dies before their 5th birthday, and there are fewer nurses in all of India than in London." While Dickie hosted the princely states, Edwina gathered their wives, not for ceremony, but for maternal health. 4 days later, she hosted another summit, governors' wives this time. The ignorance, the anti-Indian feeling, appalling, she wrote. She made them listen, introduced them to Indian ministers, made them write down what they learned. Only when their hands were full did she let them leave. A second summit would follow. This was not a gesture. It was a new structure. They called her a whirlwind, a force, a storm in silk. Some said she courted the women to reach the men. Perhaps, but it was not her motive. She spoke to them because no one else did. She did not posture. She prepared them for what was coming, for what could no longer be stopped. With Nehru, no preparation was needed. He arrived like poetry in motion, graceful, tired, exquisitely dressed, a rose in his lapel and a line from Shelley on his lips. His daughter Indira came often. His sister Mrs. Pandit became Edwina's ally. But it was Gandhi who moved her most. He came to Viceroy's house reluctantly, the Mahatma in white homespun, the rebel in the seat of power. Edwina was asked to make him comfortable. They sat in the garden. Gandhi spoke. Edwina listened. At the end, he reached not for Dickie, but for her, resting his hand on her shoulder to steady himself. "Of course," she said later, "we think Gandhi and his friends are right. We must try to fit in with what they want us to do." But what did India want? Jinnah wanted Pakistan. Nehru would not divide the country. The princes clung to privilege. The Sikhs demanded the Punjab. Gandhi, always the dissenter, offered something radical. Let Jinnah form an interim central government. The Congress refused. Gandhi withdrew. The Viceroy's plans moved forward. But without Gandhi's blessing, none of them felt whole. Partition was the only path left. Bengal and Punjab would choose sides. The princely states would be asked to join India or Pakistan. Mountbatten believed he had consensus, But the country was a tinderbox. 70,000 gathered just outside the city. They chanted, waved knives, Pakistan Zindabad. The tide was rising. Government House was under threat. Edwina and Dickie drove out, no guards, no parade. Just the two of them in bush shirts, the color of the crowd's flags. They climbed a railway embankment, alone against a sea of unrest, and raised their arms in greeting. A pause, then a roar. Cheers. Stillness. In 20 minutes, they had come and gone. No decree, no speeches, just presence and peace for that day. Dickie returned to Delhi with Pamela. Edwina stayed behind in the places torn deepest by fire. A sad tour, she wrote. The devastation is like the Blitz at its worst. Villages burned, hospitals overflowed, fear choked reason. In 4 days, she covered 1,500 miles. Jeep, plane, foot. In Multan, a dust storm forced her to turn back. Disease will come, she warned. And unless these people are given something to do, there will be more violence. The temperature climbed. Work proceeds non-stop, she wrote to Patricia. One afternoon, Nehru joined the family for a picnic. They hiked together. He taught them how to walk backward uphill. Easier on the lungs, he said. Edwina smiled. She bore her neuralgia silently, but trouble brewed beneath the sun. Dickie showed Nehru the draft independence plan. Nehru rejected it outright. India must be the sole successor to the Raj, he said. Not a peer to Pakistan, not a partitioned ghost. The blow was heavy. Non-stop conferences and headaches have started again, Edwina wrote. But still she remained. Through every discussion, every breakdown, every flicker of hope, Edwina remained. Edwina wasn't in the room when India's fate was decided, but her voice was there, over breakfast, in the garden, along every corridor where power paused to breathe. VP Menon would later tell his daughter that it was Edwina's quiet conversations with Nehru that tipped the balance. He had arrived in Simla skeptical. By the time he left, a new plan had emerged. Power would transfer not in 1948, but within the year. India and Pakistan would become dominions. Partition was inevitable. Independence would come, not slowly, but in 72 days. The transfer of power would take place on the 15th of August. London reeled, but the gesture had gravity. It meant no more delay, no more dithering. The future would arrive on schedule, or not at all. Gandhi, moved, addressed the people. The Viceroy has no hand in it. In fact, he is as opposed to division as we are. But if we, Hindus and Muslims, cannot agree, then he is left with no choice. There are still volcanoes, Edwina told Patricia. Congress, she feared, had not grasped the scale of what lay ahead. Armies, police, courts, ministries, every institution had to be split. Assets divided, flags changed, even furniture, even buildings, even maps. And through it all, the country had to function. As Dickie maneuvered in halls thick with negotiation, Edwina had her own campaign. Not borders, but continuity. She met with the heads of India's medical and welfare institutions, not to instruct, but to build something that would last after Britain left. One bill mattered most. The Nursing Council Bill, long stalled, meant to set national standards. Edwina lobbied, she briefed, she persuaded. When it nearly collapsed, she appealed to Nehru. 2 days later, it passed. Outside, Delhi boiled. Partition had been voted. Now came the impossible task, drawing the line. Bengal and Punjab would be split, village by village, ditch by ditch. Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims all made overlapping claims to the same patches of earth. Accusations rose, tensions flared, and through it all, the summer heat pressed down. On July 18th, they marked their silver wedding anniversary. Gandhi sent a letter calling her dear sister. Photographs showed a glowing couple, but their marriage, as always, was threaded with strain. Still, they held the stage. Behind the curtain, a quiet disappointment bloomed. Dickie had hoped to serve as Governor General of both India and Pakistan. He had prepared, planned, briefed staff. But Jinnah made it clear there would be no shared future. He would govern Pakistan. Mountbatten would remain only in India. The sun would set on the British Empire on August 15th. Astrologers were aghast. 15 August, they said, was inauspicious. On the 14th, Nehru spoke to the nation. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. While he spoke, the Mountbattens waited in the Viceroy's house, watching a Bob Hope film. At 8:30 the next morning, they descended the grand stairs of the Durbar Hall, Dickie in full regalia, Edwina in gold brocade. A flashbulb exploded. The crowd gasped. Was it a bomb? Neither moved. Outside, a sea of faces. Nehru had to climb onto a rooftop to calm them. The Mountbattens were nearly lifted into their carriage. In the afternoon, the new flag rose by the war memorial. Saffron, white, green. As it unfurled, a rainbow appeared. That night, 3,000 guests filled the Mughal gardens. Lanterns swayed in the trees. The air was soft at last. At 2 a.m., the final guest left. Mountbatten wrote, "I've written to thank so many people for their help in finding the right solution for India. But so far, I've not written to the person who helped me most. Thank you, my pet, with all my heart." Independence had come, the flags had risen, but no one was ready for what came next. India descended into chaos, blood on the streets, women, children, men, bodies everywhere. The brutal civil war had started. Edwina demanded they return. On the 5th of September, they returned to Delhi, Dickie to his council chamber, Edwina to the Muslims inside Government House. 5,000 were brought into the compound. Food was scarce. Tempers flared. Still, she chaired the relief committee. The meetings began at dawn, and no voice was too small. Priorities were set not by ceremony, but by need. Fluid, urgent, real. She summoned every agency, every aid society, and created something new, the United Council for Relief and Welfare. For 18 hours a day, she worked, organizing food, medicine, clothing, shelter. 100 camps now lined the roads, and more with each sunrise. There were no uniforms, no titles, no tiaras, just a woman with limp hair and ink-stained fingers wading through paper, pain, and people. The violence had reached a scale almost beyond speech. Bodies lying around on roads everywhere, Edwina wrote. The skies burned with fire. Hospitals were attacked. Cholera bloomed in the gutters. She didn't flinch. One day, she walked among the Muslim women baking bread at the ridge. The next, she inspected Irwin Hospital under sniper fire. She stood in Purana Quila, where 50,000 now slept, in Humayun's tomb, where 16,000 took refuge in the damp. At Jama Masjid, unofficially housing 5,000, the filth was indescribable. She moved through monsoon and mud, but still it wasn't enough. She flew over the refugee columns with Nehru. Below them, on the roads, bullocks, carts, bare feet, and silence. Sikhs and Muslims passed one another without speaking, too dazed to hate. In Delhi, the tension thickened with the air. The power failed. Bells stopped ringing. Cholera spread in the camps. Once a week, she visited Gandhi. His presence in Calcutta had stilled the mobs. He had fasted until peace returned. His followers held prayer meetings on train platforms, waiting for violence to vanish. And sometimes it did, but not everywhere. In East Punjab, the killing never stopped. Refugees poured in. Edwina's council sent vaccines, clothes, rice, doctors, anything they could find. And then Gandhi was shot. The news tore through the city like thunder through smoke. The war stilled. The streets filled. His body, cloaked in marigolds, was placed on a flower-draped carriage. From all corners they came, millions pouring into Delhi like a tide. The Mountbattens joined the crowd, swept forward by a sea of grief as the procession moved toward the pyre. But the mourners became a crush. Edwina, Pamela, the staff, were nearly pulled into the fire. Dickie, seeing the panic rise in their eyes, gave a single command: sit, and so they did. The Governor-General, the Vicereine, their daughter, secretaries, soldiers, knees bent, heads bowed, sitting in the dust like everyone else. It was more than safety, it was surrender, to grief, to greatness, to the weight of a nation in mourning. The flames rose, the petals fell. From the crowd came one cry: Gandhi is immortal. And something passed between Edwina and Nehru in that moment. Not yet love, but something like recognition, the kind that stills time. Afterward, she wrote to him, not as a statesman, but as a man whose heart she could feel breaking. He replied, his voice almost whispering through the page, I am in some danger of losing faith in myself. Where are our brave ideals? In May, she invited him to the mountains. He came. They drove north in a red Talbot, the road coiling behind them like ribbon. Each day, the air grew thinner, clearer. They wandered through orchards, picnicked by glacial lakes, walked barefoot through streams. In the evenings, they read together. One night, he knocked over her inkstand. They laughed and blotted the mess with their hands. A perfect evening, she wrote. And later, a heart-to-heart with J.N. She told him everything. The child she had been, the woman she became, the emptiness she still carried. And Nehru, who had worn loneliness like a second skin, listened with a tenderness that made her feel, perhaps for the first time, whole. The morning he left, she stood watching the road. "I hated seeing you drive away," she wrote. "You've left me with a strange sense of peace and happiness. Perhaps I brought you the same?" His reply crossed hers in the post. "Life is a dreary business, and when a bright patch comes, it rather takes one's breath away." When they were apart, she felt unmoored. When they were together, she felt real. At dawn on June 11th, he came for her again. They flew east to say goodbye to Sarojini Naidu. In the gardens of Nainital, under the heavy scent of bougainvillea, they made a promise, not as lovers, but as two souls who had found each other late when they thought there was nothing left to find. "That nothing we did or felt," she later wrote, "would ever come between your work and mine, because that would spoil everything." But the days fell away too fast. The governor of Bengal had arrived to take Dickie's place. Their time in India was ending. She hadn't wanted to come. Now, she couldn't bear to leave. "I love Delhi even like this," she wrote, "and my heart aches at the thought of leaving it, and them, so soon." Then came one last gift, a final journey. Hyderabad trembled on the edge of rebellion. Dickie flew to Dehradun. Edwina and Nehru joined him. On the drive, she spoke of faith and loss, of death and rebirth. She felt ill on the curves, but still she smiled. "I rose above it," she wrote. "I was enchanted." Nehru asked her to stay, to continue the work. She reminded him. He had told her to be practical, he sighed. "You and Dickie cannot escape your fate," he said, "just as I cannot escape mine. But a general fear and malaise creeps over me when I picture you saying your final goodbyes." And then those goodbyes came. June 16th, one last meeting on the abducted women. June 17th, farewell to the staff. June 19th, dinner under a full moon with Nehru's family. "Sadder and sadder," she wrote. June 20th, a farewell banquet. 7,000 guests. Nehru stood to speak. Then Dickie, then Edwina, her voice trembling, her words lost to tears. Nehru could not hear them, but he felt them. The next morning at Government House, they met at sunrise. They gave each other small gifts, simple things, heavy with meaning. Then she boarded the plane, but something inside her broke. Quietly, without spectacle. She unclasped the St. Christopher medallion she had worn all her life, the one her father had given her mother, the one she had never taken off. She called for a steward. "Give it to him," she said, and he ran across the tarmac into the rising sun toward Nehru. India had given her many things, but the most precious came at the very end. "You've shown me how to speak about my feelings," Edwina wrote. "I never wanted to, never thought I could until now." Back in London, the silence was startling. "General exhaustion and depression," she wrote. "Life is lonely and unreal." She sent Nehru a letter each day, numbering them carefully to keep them in order. He read them over and over, turned to Auden, to Blake, to the Song of Solomon. "I lose myself in dreamland," he confessed, "very unbecoming in a prime minister. But then I am only incidentally a prime minister." And later, "You came and unlocked the doors and windows. These letters are forlorn fragments, rooted in neither world." If the post lagged, she would call. She missed Delhi, missed the dust, missed him. Even the south of France felt hollow. Sunshine, gossip, the shimmer of wealth, once intoxicating, now seemed dull. "I've grown out of all this," she told him. "The people, the life, even the scenery." That October, he came to London. "Too lovely," she wrote. She drove him to Broadlands the next morning. She'd asked Dickie awkwardly for time alone. He agreed. She had imagined the moment for weeks. But when it came, she was too moved to speak. So she let him lead. They walked the gardens, sat beside the river, talked in the drawing room. They laughed, they wept. He pressed her hands, took her arm, held her, as he liked to do when he was moved. Whether it ever went further didn't matter. Not to them, not to those who truly knew them. To her lovers, someone once said, Edwina gave only the shell of herself. To Nehru, she gave her soul. They spent a few perfect weeks. Then came London again, banquets, receptions, duties, and then goodbye. Dickie was posted to Malta. She was expected to join him. She wore dark glasses, hoping they would hide the tears. In Malta, she could not settle. "I feel my brain shrinking," she wrote. She threw herself into work with St. John's. But when she visited Sandringham to see young Prince Charles, she felt like an intruder. "Only in India do I feel at home," she wrote. And that autumn, she went back. This time, Pamela came with her. The visit was official: refugee camps, hospitals, schools. But they stayed at the Prime Minister's residence. Each day was full: receptions, reunions, gymnastic displays. But the best moments came early, in the garden, before breakfast. They had promised themselves 4 days, a holiday in Orissa, to walk the sands at Puri, to visit the temple at Konarak. They swam at sunrise, walked beneath the moon. He told stories of gods and ghosts, of prison, of childhood. She listened, even as fever pulled at her. They never called it love. They didn't need to. They spoke in silence, in mythology, in mangoes and birch bark, in a garden before dawn. Once, she had feared revealing herself. But in those letters, she gave him everything. He pressed her hands, and she stayed a little longer. He returned with her to London, met the king, stayed another 2 weeks. "You've brought me all I ever longed for," she told him. "Happiness, balance, misery." Then Dickie was posted to Cyprus. She didn't want to go. She knew her duty and resented it. For years, rumors had circled about Dickie's sexuality and his relationships with young men. Files had been destroyed, but the whispers persisted. What it meant to Edwina, no one could say. Once, Dickie had written to her, "I believe early failures in our marriage caused you to loathe me, much as I loathed myself. I'm vain, not the man you wanted, but please believe me, your friendship is what matters most, as long as we place no restrictions on one another. I sometimes like being with other people, just as you do." She thought of a ship 30 years ago, his smile, the way he kissed the back of her hair as she leaned, seasick, over the rail. 2 young lovers, with no idea what lay ahead, and still that same ridiculous flutter returned. She cabled him, "So looking forward to Cyprus, dear Vice Admiral." That October, Nehru returned to London. He brought mangoes, cigarettes, but more than that, he brought ease. With him, she felt seen, respected, understood. She had spent her life giving love to the sick, the dispossessed, the forgotten. But now she had found a soulmate. For Nehru, she was the one who asked nothing, only to know him. With her, he could finally rest. They both saw it as pure. "I'm not interested in sex as sex," she once wrote. "There must be more to it." Back in India, Nehru walked his garden. "The house was lit up," he wrote, "except for one wing, your rooms." The darkness stood out, a sign of a light that had gone, of life slipping away and leaving emptiness behind. All that remains is your scent. In 1952, the king died. Just days before, Edwina had seen him, laughing, full of life. Then came Dickie's mistake. At a dinner before the Lords, he toasted the House of Mountbatten. Churchill was livid. A royal decree followed. Philip would not pass on his name. Rumors swirled that Dickie controlled the royal couple, that he was orchestrating the monarchy from behind the curtain. To quiet the storm, he was posted abroad. Beaverbrook's papers sharpened their knives. They dredged up Dickie's affair with Jeannie Lindsay, his son's wife. Edwina only fueled the fire. At a luncheon with aristocrats, she condemned British colonialism. She decried police brutality in Kenya, argued that all subjects, of all colors, deserved justice. He was told in no uncertain terms, "Do not bring your wife again." Edwina was incandescent, but she had become a convenient scapegoat for her husband's enemies and would remain so for years to come. Still, she worked. St. John's, convalescent homes, girl guides, sea rangers, mutual health services for housewives. She and Dickie drifted further apart. They were rarely seen together, except when protocol required it. Every spring, she returned to India. Most winters, he visited Britain. They spoke often of divorce. "I've never tried to hold you," Dickie told her. "I just want you to stay, if you want to." And they stayed. Not for appearances, not for power, but for the children, the grandchildren, the life they had created together. And somewhere beneath the ache and the silence, they still believed they belonged. A few days after the king's death, Edwina collapsed. A hemorrhage. She was rushed to hospital. No malignancy was found. But something inside her shifted. She turned to Dickie. "I've been thinking about all those letters from Nehru," she said. They are part love letters, part history. Most of it spiritual, you'll understand. Some passages perhaps could be published, not as letters to me or to you, but simply as a diary. It seems selfish otherwise, for such wealth of feeling, of insight, of life, to never see the light of day. Once she had kept them secret. Now she entrusted them to Dickie and to her legacy. Dickie said little. He was still reeling from nearly losing her. A year later, he wrote back, "I've always understood the very special relationship between you two. God, in his mercy, didn't give me jealousy, only the desire for your happiness. Whether their love was physical, history cannot say. Read 20 biographies and you'll find 20 answers. But the truth was never about what happened. It was about what endured." In 1954, Mountbatten was named First Sea Lord. He moved into Admiralty House beneath the portrait of his father. Edwina congratulated him, smiling, supportive. But privately, she confessed, "His job looms so large that I dare say and do nothing without due thought. It frightens me. It suffocates me." War had changed her. She no longer longed for salons or champagne. She traveled again, Korea, Malaya, Kenya, Nigeria. She saw war, famine, prisons, starvation. Why is it always the communists and fascists who seem to get away with it? She asked, "I feel powerless and guilty." But she never stopped. No journey too daunting, one colleague recalled. No distance too great. Earthquake zones, jungles, refugee camps. Wherever governments failed, Edwina walked in, St. John uniform pressed, asking no permission. Critics called her a do-gooder. She didn't care. Her politics were her own. Progressive, impatient, deeply felt. "NATO has everything wrong with it," she said. "The UN is a racket." To ministers, she was unsettling, because she was often right. And still, people talked. "There were rumors about me and Nehru," she told a friend. Of course there were. She ignored them. So did he. So did Dickie. "We decided long ago to take gossip in our stride." Time passed. The fever eased, but the flame never went out. Nehru once wrote, 10 years, and I found your letters, once fat and overflowing, growing thinner each spring." The silence, he understood, was practical, but it still stung. Had the poetry turned to prose, he asked. "I don't think so," she replied. "You added to my life," he told her, "and did not come in its way. For that, I am infinitely thankful." In 1958, when he considered resigning, she urged him to rest. "Should I go silent for a while?" she offered. His answer came quickly. "What have I done to deserve that? Do you know what your letters mean to me?" By the end of 1958, something softened in her. She let Yola visit. She sat in the hall, waiting for Dickie. She smiled through ministerial dinners. The family thrived. Patricia had 4 children. Pamela married David Hicks. The wedding was beautiful. But Edwina was exhausted. She had been ill for years. Fevers, infections, cracked ribs, laryngitis, angina, chickenpox caught from a grandchild. "India will set me up," she told Dickie. And it did, for a time. But by the summer of 1959, "I am not so good," she wrote to Nehru. By October, she was warned. Without rest, she had months to live. She went anyway. Cyprus. Then Bombay. Then Delhi. One final meeting with Nehru. They walked quietly. Spoke of what was, what might have been, what would never be. Then, North Borneo. She changed into her uniform before exiting the plane. By the time she reached the Turner's residence, her skirt was soaked with sweat. She smiled and pressed on. On February 19th, she visited a jungle training camp. She laughed on the way back. That night, she stumbled on the stairs. She brushed it off. The next morning, neuralgia. The doctor suspected flu. She refused to cancel. She shook hands, inspected parades, smiled through the pain. That evening, she collapsed quietly. On the morning of February 21st, 1960, Irene Checkley came to wake her. There was no reply. Edwina had died in her sleep, sometime around 2:30 a.m., surrounded by Nehru's letters. Her coffin, draped in the flag of St. John, was placed aboard a plane. Orchids were laid beside her. Dickie was woken by a telegram. "Edwina has died peacefully in her sleep." He was devastated. "Tragedy," he wrote in his diary. His hand shook across the page. She was brought home to Broadlands. As her coffin came up the drive, her little dog, Snippet, ran to greet her. That was the worst. She lay in Romsey Abbey, guarded in silence by her people. Dickie stood alone, weeping openly. 30 years earlier, on a rainy afternoon, she had written him, "Please don't bury me in a cemetery. I'm claustrophobic. Could I be buried in a sack at sea?" And so on February 25th, they took her to Portsmouth. Aboard the frigate Wakeful, the Archbishop read the rites. Edwina was committed to the waves. From the Indian ship Trishul, sent by Nehru, a wreath of marigolds was cast into the sea. It floated for a time, then disappeared. And Edwina Mountbatten, the girl who was always running, finally found peace. Thank you for watching this week's story on Edwina Mountbatten. What did you think of Edwina's life? Was she more than the sum of her scandals? Or are the scandals what we should remember? What do you think shaped her most? Her lonely childhood, her restless marriage, or the purpose she found in war and service? Do you believe her love for Nehru changed her? Or was it the world finally allowing her to show who she had always been? And what about Dickie? So much has been written about his affairs with men over the years. How much credence do you place in these stories, and how much do you think it affected Edwina? YouTube often favors short, 15-minute highlight reels. But when I created this channel, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to tell the real stories, the triumphs, the tragedies, the brilliance, and the flaws. Not just names and dates, but full lives. Full women. We're not a studio. We're not a big company. We're just a small channel with a big mission: to tell women's stories the way they deserve to be told. If this resonated with you, your likes, your comments, your shares, and your subscriptions mean the world. They help us keep going, and they help others discover these stories too. And to our patrons and channel members, you are the heart of this work. Thank you. The mythic men and women who help keep this dream alive. The dream of telling the truth beyond the scandal. Of showing women, not just in fragments, but in full flight. Velocity Girl, Zen Life 68, Jillian Barker, Kimberly Ray, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Copham Chung, Harry Thurston, Anna Livy, Michelle Lynn Neal, Karen Craig, Bhavya Andrea, Tracy Walsh, Joy McGuire, Elizabeth, CTS Bathory, America Marie, Amanda Lynn Snowball, The Inappropriate Heifer, Kendra McNally, Marianne Nelson, Deborah Shepard, Ida Kloster Jensen, Kay Philemine, Jules Mack, Real Steel Magnolia, Maureen Tommen, Black Knight 5897, Sammy Lott, Karen Possible, Joanne Thomas Yakedo, Deborah Chmielewski, Steve Weinstein, Joya Supreme, Laura Lamond, Beverly Cox Thompson, DDH, Beth Dawson, Stephanie Warren Smith, Sue Whitaker, PB, Monica Krista Schaefer Hazlett, Marcy Joe, Wendy Fairfull, Trudy DeSwart, T. Monroe, Catherine Wolfe, Janet Phelps, Roxanne Schuster, Kathleen Martin, Marina Barron, Melissa Pulio, Kelly Brown, Gwen, Melissa Gilmore, Kelly Patwell, Marsha Corbin, Lisa Karen, Catherine Ratensky Harrison, Michael Nelson, Black Cat Tarot, Chrissy Bethune, Hesta Kirsten, Karen Craig, Michael Dean Augustine, Chris Miller, Catherine Davison, Randy Fox, Lucy Gonzalez, Curious Traveler, Deb Fisher, Indira Becha, and Dreaming of the Kingdom. And to everyone, all the silent men and women out there who watch until the last note plays, thank you. Until next week, stay curious, stay strong, keep exploring history, and as always, thanks for watching Mythic Women.